To order the November 1st meeting of the City of Santa Barbara Historic Landmarks Commission. At the beginning of our meetings, we are open to public comment on items not on the agenda. Anyone wishing to speak at this time, please come forward. Seeing none, I'll close public comment. Move on to the approval of the minutes of the meeting of October 18th.
So moved.
Sitting in house. Any questions or comments?
They were excellent minutes, and there are no corrections from me.
Chair,
Mr. Mahan.
on page 4, on page 4, let's see if I can get to it. Yeah, the item 7. Carefully consider the colors used on the building, including the balcony. I think we intended it to be the balcony railing, the color. So that should say balcony railing, which should not necessarily be black.
That's correct.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Grumbine.
I just had a question. I wasn't sure if I was remembering it correctly. On page 3, at the bottom, the motion number 4, the majority of the commission supported the palm grove, but would like it made more formal in composition.
Informal.
Yeah, I thought it was
Informal.
already formal.
Yeah, informal,
Less formal.
Or less formal, yeah.
Less formal.
less formal.
Any others? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any abstain? The motion carries. We'll move on to the consent calendar. Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All items today were reviewed by Commissioner Mahan. Item A, 203 Chapala received approval of review after final. Item B, 340 West Correo Street received approval of review after final. Item C, 2025 Garden Street received project design approval and final approval. Item D, 232 Natoma Avenue received project design approval and final approval. Item E, 909 Laguna Street received approval of review after final. Item F, 35 State Street received project design approval with condition that the applicant submit a reflected ceiling plan to the city urban historian for final approval, showing the proposed ceiling heaters between the beams and the existing lighting. Item G, 35 State Street received project design approval and final approval.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Mahan.
Thank you.
Can I have a motion to ratify the consent calendar?
Second.
Sitting. Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstain?
Abstain from item F and G.
So noted. The motion carries. Announcements?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 3 announcements, most of them just recapping. So they have 2 upcoming appeals. The first one is for 3 Rosemary Lane. That's scheduled to be heard by City Council on November 14th at 2 p.m. So Commissioner Mahan, if you're available to attend on
I'll be
behalf
there.
of the HLC.
Be there.
The second appeal coming up is 35 State Street for the Hotel Californian artificial turf. That is scheduled for November 21st. I believe Mr. House, you wanted to attend, and I wasn't sure if any other members wanted to attend, but you're able to do so. The last announcement is regarding the upcoming public workshop. I do have flyers for the Underpass State Street project, which you can take with you. That's scheduled for November 15th after our HLC meeting. It'll be from 5 to 8 p.m. Staff would like 3 members of the HLC to attend to hear comments by the public just regarding the general proposal. Right now we have Commissioner Jury and Commissioner House attending, but we would like one other, Julio, our Commissioner. Okay, thank you.
Grumbine?
I'm actually going to be heading to LA at that time.
Yeah.
I may.
Commissioner Vena said he would
Oh,
attend.
okay, great. Perfect. Thank you.
And then Nicole Hernandez.
I just have 2 quick announcements. One is that you got your in your packets the next round of 50 structural merit designations, and that will be heard on November 29th.
November 29th?
Yes. And Ms. Plumer and I did go on a site visit at 203 Chapala Street. We had made sure that they carefully removed the windows, and I had watched them remove them and put them in storage. We wanted to let you know that they are back in, the original windows, and they look great. I mean, they really did an excellent job of protecting those, and they're back in. And
Nice.
That's
Thank you
mine.
for your work.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Arias.
I have two announcements to make. The first announcement, I learned that at the council meeting yesterday, Bob Cunningham resigned from the sign committee. I informed staff, I think you probably already knew about it. I was told today that the subcommittee is made up of non-commissioned people. And as such, signs are very important to landmarks and how they are handled. So we need to look for a person and urge a person who is well knowledgeable in the sign ordinance and the historic ordinances to apply for this position. I'm sorry, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Rios. I did pass that information along. Commissioner Jury is currently still an alternate for the sign
Correct.
committee. But yeah, we'll get more information back to you as far as Bob Cunningham's resigning from that position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The signage is very important to our historic districts. The other item I wanted to talk about is at the last meeting of the City Council and Planning Commission, I attended as an individual and spoke about the need for getting the historic ordinance done. It has now been 4 years, and it's time for it to be completed. In talking to them, I told them how important it is for the economics of the city, our reputation as a historic city, and the care that needs to be put in this. I received support from several members of the city council, as well as from the mayor, that this ordinance would be proceed. And Irma is present. She came for the last, and you could probably respond to what Renee said, that there had to be staffing, but that the ordinance would be coming forth. I would defer to you if it's okay. But the main thing is we need to get this ordinance done. It's important to our city.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Lavoie and commissioners. So at the joint Planning Commission and City Council hearing last week, the Historic Districts Ordinance was brought up in respect to being a priority project. And what Ms. Brooke announced was that given the workload that the Planning Division currently has, as well as the City Attorney's Office, that it would probably not be until the beginning of the year before we could actually get to that item. And I think for the reasons that currently the ENZO is being implemented, as well as the ADU ordinance is going through, and it's really taken a lot of the city attorney's time and workload. So he's trying to get to that. So I think that it is definitely something that is on our radar. You've made it very clear, and we're trying to get there.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to announce was that advisory group recruitment is going on right now, and tomorrow is the last day to apply. The Historic Landmarks Commission has several members who are going to be up in terms of their term. So Commissioner Mahan and Commissioner Suding. So we urge you to
I submitted
apply.
an application.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
I won't be resubmitting. I pretty much termed out.
Okay, so anyone else that, or the public, we're trying to recruit and make sure all our boards are going to be having some vacancies. So we would like to get people to apply and make them aware.
Thank you.
Question, I think Renee said that the ordinance would be 2 to 3 months or something away?
Yes,
There was
certainly.
a time limit given.
Well, she mentioned between 3 and 4 months. I think that's what I heard for the ordinance.
You're wrong. No.
Okay. But certainly, I spoke with her earlier today, and she said, we're going to reassess at the beginning of the year, but we definitely can get it to it before then.
That is the beginning of next year.
Right, right. That's 3 or 4 months.
There
correct.
is one additional point I would like to make that I consider very important, and that is that when information is written up or given to various people, that this board and all members that are concerned get full copies of it before the meeting, and things aren't just said, well, what do you think about this or what do you think about that? We need to have documentation in advance so that people can think about the effects of things and how it's going to work and whether it's going to be successful or not. Because as I said, this is a very, very important ordinance for us. So I would urge that as staff starts to work on it, that they distribute the information well in advance to people so that we can have adequate input at meetings. Thank you. And thanks for taking my space. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Before you leave, has anyone filled out an application for landmarks already, other than Mr. Mahan?
No, not at this time. We were just reviewing that online, and we don't see anything, although it may have not been updated yet. So I will check in with the city clerk's office to see what or how many applications have.
I should be in, and I know that Ed Lindick has submitted an
Oh, really?
application.
Oh, wonderful.
So we'll follow up with that.
Mr. Chair, is there for someone that we might tell today and try to get it by tomorrow? What's the easiest? I know it's online. I know I've seen it, but is there an easy search? What should they search? I mean, the city's website is the easiest thing to navigate for sure, but.
It's in the city clerk's website, and there should be a link for the advisory group applications.
Okay.
Or boarding commissions, I think. And if they want to call me or Nicole, we can certainly navigate them.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you so much. Any other announcements from staff? Nope. Subcommittee reports? Are there any? Mr. Grumbine, would you like to be willing to talk about the State Street?
State Street, yes. Sorry, my mind was fried there for a second. So as an update for the State Street, so the charrette went through. It went very well. There were 9 groups. They each took 4 blocks of overlapping State Street, and they spent all day coming up with an overview for all of State Street, so they could do whatever the kind of big picture idea of whatever they thought would be the best way of connecting it to the beach and how the funk zone and everything else was going, and just sort of a long-term plan for State Street of how they see it working. And then they each had 4 blocks that they then 4 specific blocks that they designed. Basically implemented their ideas at that level. And then they also designed a couple of buildings in particular that say you have a developer that wants to do 2 or 3 properties and combine them, and what can they do, and how can those numbers work, at least as a generic scenario. So it went very well. There were a lot of good ideas. There was actually a lot of consistency with how people approached it. There was a lot of Paseo talk and how to work things through in the internal block, so that was very great to see. And they're now putting it together. I'm part of the subcommittee for that as well, putting it together a presentation to City Council, which right now it hasn't been set, but they're looking at December or January as the kind of general time frame, and basically showing the summary of the work that was done and sort of some of the key ideas for making it actually work in terms of bringing density down to State Street as opposed to the periphery. So it was actually quite a well, and as well attended. It was a full crowd for when the public came and everyone presented. So it was good. was a good, all in all, good body of work. And now everything's being scanned and put together into digital form. So
Great. I'm sure we'd like to hear that too, that presentation also.
yeah, I'll keep you guys up to date as to when that will be.
Great. Thank you. Any other subcommittee reports? Seeing none, we'll move on to miscellaneous action item, city's potential historic resources list update. Nicole?
Yes, I can put some pictures from the memo I sent you all. Here's the 1878 form. So, thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. As I wrote to you in the memo, this project came before the designation subcommittee last year. We discussed if this should remain on the list or on the potential historic list or not, or should be recommended for removal. At that time, my opinion was that it is not architecturally good example of a bungalow court, but the designation subcommittee at the time really thought it was important to stay on the list as an example of development of small working class in housing in the 1920s. Now the property is in escrow, and the owner and the new buyer requested the designation subcommittee forward it to you for discussion on removal from the list. You can also request a full structures report, but it was a request, and the subcommittee did think it warranted coming back to the full commission for discussion prior to requesting the full report or removal.
Well, Nicole, what was the evaluation of the subcommittee, a recommendation of the subcommittee?
Well, they wanted it to remain on the list because it would have it could meet criterion A, being that it is an example of housing in the 1920s on Lower Haley. It's one of the last remaining bungalow courts of that area, showing working class housing of Santa Barbara. I don't think it meets many of the other criteria because architecturally it doesn't really meet, compare with some of the other bungalow courts that are done and completed in different styles. And I listed the ones that are on the potentials list for you. However, it was completed in 1923, and it does still retain most of its original materials and the layout of the four down the row. And I think if you turn the first sheet over, it'll show you how they kind of line up as you go down the court. And I think the TV could zoom in a little and show. Yeah.
Actually, if you could zoom in on this picture, please. Thank you. Let's see. Well, open public comment. The first speaker I have is Robert Hunter, is it? Please come forward. You can sit here, please. And you need to speak into the microphone within about 6 inches of the microphone, please.
Great. Good afternoon. I'm the buyer, and I'm in escrow currently, and I have been working with Nicole to try to see if we can get something somewhat definitive prior to us closing escrow, and not necessarily going through a full structures report. However, I wouldn't, if the commission felt that it was necessary to record that in some way, I'd be happy to do that. And make that a condition of removing it from the list. And the photos that are online here are not quite up to date. I think that they were taken quite some time ago.
That's incorrect. My intern and I took those just a few weeks ago.
These right here in this one?
Yes.
Really? Because I had some that were like.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. I just took some that were a little bit different, but I mean,
Well, what has changed between your photos and the photos we have?
How does it affect the significance? More to the point.
well, the maintenance of this and the condition of the buildings is kind of terrible. They have these lean-tos right in here, and there's, I think that there's like a lot more inventory in the city that are better examples of bungalow, residents, including the one down at, I think, 227 East Haley, which is just on the other side of the church. So those are workforce housing. However, they had, I think, a block wall or something in front, put up in front of it. You know which one I'm talking about? It's on the other side of the church.
Yeah, they were wood, and they had a stucco facade put on them at some point in time.
Right. And so, for me, I wouldn't be interested in the property if these stayed on the list. And I just had to fix them up because the amount of work and money that would take to fix these up would be just horrendous. I mean, some of the photos from the insides are just, I mean, there's so many safety violations and things like that I would be willing to, I'm going to improve, but to do that and then not be able to use, the property in its full value. I'm looking at this as a land value situation where, it's land value in the future, whether it be 5 years, 7 years down the road in this area, would be a greater and better use as this corridor develops. So, I just, I'm looking for some guidance, some direction, whether or not this has to stay on the list or.
You'll hear us talk about it.
Okay, good.
Mr. Chair, I do have some questions for the or for the speaker, if I may.
Let's. I'm going to take you as the applicant. So if there are questions, we can do it after.
Great.
Perfect.
So if you'd step back and we'll finish public comment. Mr. DeForest, public comment, please.
Yes.
Oh, there.
Thank you. I definitely think, and I like the offer that this get a full historic structures report, so we could at least have a record of its history before my time. So I don't know when and why these bungalow courts on Haley Street were constructed. Also, it would be useful to know or to have some kind of official evaluation of their condition today. So, because this is, I don't know, I mean, it doesn't even say how many units are they, because this would cut into the available workforce housing units available in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeForest. Anyone else in the public wishing to speak on this item? I'll close public comment. Sir, if you'd come forward again. Any questions for either Nicole or the applicant? Mr. Suding?
Yes. So you said you were interested in this for land value. So that says to me that you would be removing the existing structures.
Not now, but potentially in 5 to 7 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, Ms. Hernandez, do you have any idea if it's the original what the original structures were? Is it these four, or was there another one that was removed? Do you have any idea
So-
of what the extent of
I
port we're looking at?
I could, because I only see it from the street view and there's a gate. I have only seen the front four, so I don't know what's the condition back there. Jake Jacobus, the previous architectural historian, looked at it, and he said the first four were architecturally significant and the back two had been altered, but we don't have any evidence to that. He might have gotten to get back there, but, you know, I haven't been back there physically myself because it's
Do you have something to add to that?
Yes, the first four were built, and then there was an additional. Well, actually, there was a single-family residence at the back. That was the first. That was the first structure to be built. Then there were four built in the front, and then there was one built behind the four. So it was a configuration like this. This being Haley right
Can
here.
you put it on screen?
Yeah.
There we go. Actually, if City TV could zoom in a bit again.
Yeah.
Okay. So A, B, C, and D were original 1920s.
Correct.
And then when do you think that E and F were?
I don't have those dates, but it's in the city record.
Okay.
And then there's also another garage that is in another part of the property.
Okay. I think that answers
Yeah.
the question. Thank you.
Other questions?
Oh, actually, one more question. I'm sorry. I was looking at this
There you go.
site plan again. What does that dog leg do
So this is an access to the garage from Garden Street.
from Garden Street? Okay, so Garden Street does access
Correct.
the interior.
But it only accesses the garage.
Right, it's driveway for the garage.
Do we have a pointer?
Yeah, here it is.
So Nicole, the significance, or the members of the subcommittee, the significance is a pattern of development of low-cost worker housing.
yes, and that it took bungalow court. They were, you know, they're rare too.
So that we don't get into that trap again of this is not a, this is a, it is just an example of low-cost worker housing composed as a site ensemble.
Or as a court. Yeah.
Well, let's not get into that.
Well, okay. We just started to.
In case Alex gets hired to do the report. Okay, no other questions, comments? Let's start with the historian, Mr. Grumbine.
Yeah, so I think for us to sort of to really properly analyze this and to give a real answer, I think we'll need a full structures report. I think that, and even with that, once you have a full structures report and we comment on it, that's commenting on it as we see it or as we see that report now, and that holds some weight. But there, you'll see reports from 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and they'll need to be updated per what the new applicant is saying about this property and what they want to do with it. So I think that there's a lot of questions I would have for a historian. Are they the original panes of glass? The wood, sash looks like it's original. Is it beyond repair? There's a lot of things that we would get out of that structures report that would tell us what's the critical areas and what shape they're in currently. And there are certain things in the report so far that we can see, that I can see that would make me want a real professional to look at it and analyze it. So I think that in fairness to that, I think that would be a thing. Now, that's not to say that other things can't happen, and if it works out for you in your mind that there's other things that could be developed back here, or if there's some other solution that you have, that's great. But I would say that just especially for these, because those have been identified having that characteristic, which is a quality outside of, if the front door was changed or this was changed or that was changed, those are still those four things. I would say that would normally have to have a structures report, and that would be my comment, that it would really need to have it before we can analyze it.
Commissioner Mahan?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Commissioner Sitting?
I agree with that.
Commissioner Reed?
Yeah, I agree with that. I also, think that this is a good example of low-cost housing configuration or a court, whatever you want to call it. I don't think it's necessarily a good example of the architectural style. So that being said, that might have some weight on what the commission decides to do.
Yeah, it says vernacular, but hold on, kind of second.
Commissioner Rees?
I think that we need a full report. I know in the description it talks about the slip track siding and things like this and the gable roof, et cetera. So I think a full report is necessary.
I agree.
I'm hearing a strong consensus of a request for a full report. The economics of land development is not a consideration. We are here
Got it.
only to consider if the property is historic or not, independent of even its condition, unless it's been so compromised that it's unrecognizable, which the ones that further down Haley have been plastered over, basically. Where these, you sort of look at them and go, yeah, I can tell it was built in 1890 something. Before we move on to that motion, do you have any questions?
Is there a desire? I mean, there's not anything in the draft or the ordinances that talks about a vernacular style, and that's the only way that this thing is categorized as. And so, is there a way in which that would weigh into, a decision as far as this property is concerned?
It might.
Right.
It is only one of the criteria, as opposed to the criteria I mentioned. It represents a pattern of development, and that's an important criterion. And that we are embroiled in a citywide discussion on what worker housing looks like and affordable housing looks like as being a city priority. That sort of like trumps what the architectural style is. What does low-cost housing look like in that period? Well, this is a good example of what undecorated Victorian looks like for the maids to live in. So it would seem I'm inclined to leave it on the list, but I'm hearing other people have more questions, and so we work by majority here. So I would entertain a motion then that we continue this indefinitely. And express the desire of the commission to have a structures report prepared.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? The motion carries. Thank you.
Would this motion be appealable to City Council?
This motion,
It's an action item.
No, Mr. Chair, because it's continued indefinitely.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay. And I don't think there was an application, so.
No, you're right.
So I don't think that it would be appealable.
well, it might be.
Yeah,
You never know.
Actually, if we had voted to put it on, we wouldn't have an appeal. Our next item is a review after final 206 East Anapamu Street.
You're welcome.
Okay. Can I have one of those? Before you begin, I believe, Mr. Mahan, you referred this to the full commission?
I did, Mr. Chair, and because when it was originally brought before us that the trellis would have to come down, I think it was Mr. Cornell that appeared before the commission, and the trellis had to come down because it was rotting out. Actually, this is a drawing. This is not a picture of the original trellis, is it?
Yeah, that's from 2012.
Is that it? Okay. So the
Awfully good photo, Rich.
when that happened, we were promised that the trellis would be rebuilt. And so when it came before the consent calendar without the trellis being built, I didn't think that was an appropriate call for me, since the promise was made to the full commission. That's why it's here.
Understood. Thank you. Staff comments?
Yeah, just reiterating what Commissioner Mahan said. Under the original project description,
That's what's there now.
it was for the removal of just the trellis, and then it said in the description for it to return with a revised trellis design at a later date. So there was kind of an open-ended submittal at some point. Yeah, so that's really why it's here today as a review after final from that original application.
Edwards and Plunkett, yeah.
You ready for me?
I'm ready for you.
Okay. So this came out, I'm simply doing the TI for this space. Northern Trust was there previously, and we have a new tenant for Topes Group. So this came up during our landmarks review because we're making some improvements in the back for ADA accessibility. Everything that Bill spoke of is correct. I did speak with Tobes, and when Northern Trust was there, and that's when the trellis got removed, there was an abundance of new natural light that was entering into the space, which the tenants enjoyed. And Tobes enjoys because they want a quality space for their tenants. Given that the trellis is on the north side of the building, it really serves no purpose other than decoration. It's not providing shade or shelter or sun protection. I did look at the archive drawings, and I passed out copies of the original elevations of the buildings built in the 30s, I believe, and you don't see a trellis on those buildings. And I did look at the archives and saw that the trellis was actually added in 1975 when the last portion of the building was added onto. I think there may be some simpler solutions if you're concerned about doing something to that back elevation, such as maybe planting a couple trees, enhancing the landscape.
Let me interrupt you a second. This was this?
Yes.
Wait, can you point to that? So
This is the original? And this was
Up to
the,
here.
and this
This is the
was
first building built.
remodeled in when?
This was remodeled in, that was probably in the 50s or 60s.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
okay, so it used to look like this.
I believe it was an open air market originally.
Oh, cool.
And then this portion of the building got constructed in the late 30s, early 40s, and then the last piece, which is the two-story portion, it got built in 1975, and that's when the trellis was added.
Yeah.
So these show two buildings. This is the second building that got built, and then there's an additional one that got built in 75. So as part of this removal, I'm also advocating that we remove the awning over that window for the same reasons. It serves no sun protection or any useful purpose other than decoration.
Okay. So basically, you want to leave it like this, except taking that awning off.
Yes, and I'm willing to, enhance. There's a ledger board there right now,
Cleaning that up.
so that would be completely removed and patched and painted. You wouldn't know that it was there anymore.
Okay.
As I stated previously, Toe's willing to enhance the landscaping, maybe add a couple trees, to that large landscaping area in the front there.
Okay. Thank you. I'll open public comment. Okay, Mr. DeForest?
Yes, I again, this street, Cape, I don't know how many buildings are applicable, but again needs a historic structures report unless one exists, because it was certainly interesting to know when the trellis, the history of the original design of the building and when the trellis was put in in 1975, what the reasons for it were. Also, what needs to be considered is the streetscape. Is after 50-plus years, the trellis an essential part of the streetscape? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeForest. Anyone else from the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'll close public comment to the commission for questions. Mr. House, questions? No. Mr. Van Huyn? No. Ms. Rios?
Yes. Question of the historian.
Yes.
Did you, of the historian, yes. Did you research back when the building was originally constructed? And about if the trellis was added in 75?
Yeah, we have the original drawings.
I just saw them today.
Yes,
I have not had a chance to look at them in detail. I'm asking the question.
The archive drawings are here. I can unroll them for you. I have not previously looked through them. We just have them for you.
Commissioner Arias, on the archive drawings, we can lay them out. But yes, the trellis is shown in the 70s.
In the
as being
70s, but the
added.
original building was what date?
Looks like
30s.
1930.
I'm sorry, what?
1930s.
31.
Yes,
1930s? Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Suding, any questions?
I do have a question for the applicant. For the foreseeable future and for your tenant improvements, are you anticipating that this will still remain as the entry?
Yes.
Mr. Grumbine, questions?
Yes. So just to making sure I'm understanding the timeline here. So when was the trellis supposed to have been rebuilt?
Commissioner Grumbine, the application for removing the trellis was in 2015, and it didn't say when the trellis would be rebuilt. It just said an application would be submitted at a later date. So that, yeah.
Okay. And was it the same applicant?
Under the original one, it
Same owner, I
was
should say.
for, I believe it was the same owner, but it was Brian Kernell, who was representing the project at that time. Yeah.
Commissioner Mahan, questions?
I have no questions.
Okay, thank you. I have a question. Have you considered restoring the building to the original openings and filling them with glass?
I did suggest that to the Tobes group, and they were receptive to it. But the tenant that's currently signed the lease doesn't need the big openings, but they're open to it in the future.
Can't hear.
Sorry. The tenant that has signed the lease doesn't require to have the big openings, so they've decided not to pursue going back to the original facade. I did mention it to them.
Okay.
And they're receptive, and they may be receptive with a future tenant.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't hear your question, Mr. Chair.
Oh, have you considered restoring it to the 1931 appearance and filling the openings with glass? This is an Edwards and Plunkett, or was?
Yes.
Can I spring off of that question?
You can.
Would the applicant consider putting on the plant-ons or the build-outs and not necessarily changing the interior, if that worked with the, no?
Well, would they consider it? Maybe.
Yeah, I'm
Would
just,
they
well, no,
consider it? No, I mean, yeah.
and would it make sense, let me make a comment for that. I think it's because this elevation here without the trellis looks rather plain. And, some enhancement there, I think, is necessary, and it's not just the landscape.
That's a comment?
That is a comment. I'm sorry to jump into the comment.
That's fine. Say that again, please.
I think that western portion of the northern elevation where the trellis was removed needs some enhancement on the facade of the building.
Commissioner Reyes, comments?
I would refer to Commissioner
House?
I was going to say Julio, because
Thanks for
I was concerned about
I'm concerned too.
yeah, landscaping.
Whether we've gotten there or not, as far as getting some proper trees that would not overly shade it, that would pass light through, that would not overscale the building. Something sensitively done. Several trees, I mean, more than one, certainly.
Palm trees being your favorite.
Palm trees would not be my
Favorite.
at this point. In all due respect.
Whatever happens to the recommendation.
If you remove the
from
trellis
popular
because you want additional light and then you plant all dense trees, you're right back at square one, so to speak. So I think the landscaping is very important.
Commissioner House.
Well, I'm considering that the issue here is returning it to a previous state of approval. I think it was a handsome trellis. I don't think the architecture benefits or needs the trellis. I would agree that the western portion of the northern elevation you certainly would benefit from being restored to its original condition, though I don't think that's a fair requirement to impose on the project. So I think that the complete removal of the trellis is fine by me, as well as the awning, so that the arches can proudly be displayed. I certainly support Commissioner Vena's comments regarding adding some landscaping, which again focuses the view towards the entrance, the importance of the entrance. If the applicant at some future time wanted to restore the western part of the building, that would be wonderful, but I don't think that's something that's appropriate to impose.
Did I understand you correctly that you're supporting the removal of the pergola?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Grumbine.
Yeah, I think that the last decision to say that you can come back with a different trellis option or design was right, because as soon as you see this removed, I mean, if that and I'm imagining where the ends are, going to white and plaster. There is so much plaster up there. There's an entire story of plaster, basically, visually, because all the other little windows are dropped. So that elevation would be very unsatisfactory, which if they had been proposed back at the beginning, we would have said no way. But now that the trellis is just being sort of torn down, our requirement was to come back with another trellis option. I think that, yes, restoring it to something like that with glass in the openings would be way better, but at least the requirement of coming back with some sort of a design solution that fixes this facade. And I don't think we've ever accepted grow a plant as a reason to or a valid design move for covering up a whole bunch of architecture that doesn't look good. Even though I've done it plenty of times in practice.
Or your landscape architect a week later.
But I think that sort of have our standards be consistent. We've consistently said if this elevation is problematic, then you got to solve it architecturally at least. Try what you can, and that this trellis version at least looks better than than seeing it as a big open blank. So I think that either they come back with a architecturally minded design, and that might include landscape, but architecturally minded design that solves this problem, or I couldn't support just plastering it up and planting some plants.
Commissioner Mahan?
Yeah, I go along with that. The trellis is really seems to be a problem solver in my mind, but there might be a different solution that would be acceptable. The building as it is now is not acceptable. And
We would never approve something like that.
we wouldn't know. If Mr. Cornell would have shown us this picture and said, we're going to take down the trellis and this is what you guys are going to get, we would have said, no, you can't take down the trellis. But he said, we'll take down the trellis, but we'll build it back. And so that's where I am. However, to be reasonable, I think there might be another architectural solution other than a trellis.
Yeah.
And it's up for the architect and the owners to decide, which way they want to attack this problem. But as it stands right now, it's not acceptable to me.
To summarize the comments that I have, that the building as it exists is not acceptable, that our first preference would be the restoration to the Evans and Plunkett design, with an infill of the openings, or a restoration of the pergola that was installed in 1970, or an alternate architectural solution.
Thank you for calling it a pergola, because that is the correct terminology.
Yep. Also, that the landscape in any solution needs to be enhanced.
Can I get a clarification?
Sure.
On the alternate solution, that can be without a pergola.
Yes.
An architectural solution without a pergola.
Make it not look like a 1960s tract house.
It may be, too, that, you could get away with a half-depth pergola or something like, that. But you understand the issue.
I clearly understand the issue. Yeah.
It's more than that. It's placement of windows. It's
Yeah,
rhythm. It's the wrong windows. It's wrong everything.
I know what
It's
you
a
guys are-
60s tract home. And
I
being
just
kind.
wanted, I'm just wondering if a solution without the pergola was an option. for
Yes,
you
it
guys.
is. That's one of the
That's all I
options.
really-
Yeah.
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 Where-
You could do
where's-
something with those windows.
Yeah,
But we-
an applied decoration to the building. So will someone make a motion for a 2-week or indefinite?
I'll make a motion for an indefinite continuance for the applicant to study an alternate solution.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstain? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Mahan.
we need to have some kind of a time connection to this project, or otherwise nothing might ever happen.
Do you want to reconsider the motion to give them a month?
I would like to alter the motion that the applicant will return within 2 months with an alternate architectural solution.
Can the motion be modified? The firster and the seconder agree? All of those who voted for it agree?
Yes.
It is so changed. Our third item is 700 East Anapamus Street. Yeah, no, Nicole first, staff first, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commission. I did want to just reiterate, this was designated a city landmark at the request. We had a written request from the county district as well as the Alumni Association, really requesting because they were concerned about inappropriate alterations to the building. So we have a memorandum of understanding that it is only a courtesy review, but it is the expertise of this commission that can really guide the decisions in the appropriate direction for this. As you know, on a landmark, I think wood should match with wood, is my opinion, to meet the Secretary of Interior standards. If possible, you're supposed to match in materials as well.
Okay. Gentlemen, if you'd introduce yourselves for the record, please.
My name is Dave Hetyonk. I'm the Director of Facilities and Operations for Santa Barbara Unified School District.
Welcome.
My name is Richard Wordy. I am the project manager for the district.
Welcome. Why don't you start by showing us where on the site this is and then what it is exactly you're going to do. And if you would use that pointer, I'd appreciate it.
The room we selected was one that is kind of out of sight from main view of the building. Here is the front of the school. There is a vehicular entrance right here. There's parking in here, and there's vehicular entrance to come back and pick up trash cans by Marburg.
City TV, I'm sorry. Could you zoom in right here, please? Closer, please. Larger, 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 larger. I think it's legible. Thank you.
You really should have full-size plans. Why were full-size plans not submitted?
Courtesy review.
No, we just had this set because it's just the one window. So it was the details. We don't have a full plan set.
Regulations are full-size plans. Go ahead, Mr. Hetyonk. I'm sorry.
Full-size plans have not been produced for this project at this time. So we wanted to select. We have 4 schools that are city landmarks, and all of those 4 schools have failing windows, and all of those schools have requirements beyond the resources that the district has to replace existing windows. So we started looking at costs and alternatives, and we're directed to do a test with one classroom that was not highly visible from public view to see what a window replacement project may look like if it was done with an alternative other than replacing the existing window as is with wood. If the district would prefer to do wood, I think everybody would prefer to do wood. But with competing interests for all of the bond dollars between all 20-plus sites, every time we allocate funds, by the time we get around to doing the project, the amount of money we have is much less than what it was before. I know that's not a concern to the commission and should have technically no bearing. So what we're trying to do is a test to see if a alternative window that was not wood could look like a existing window for the purposes of retaining the historic nature of the school. And Richard can better address the technical portion of that than I can, but the reason we selected this room was as a test that it was out of view for the most part from main public thoroughfare. And we thought that would be best to pick a room that had significant, should I say, damage or neglect over the years from repairs. And that's why we selected this particular room at this particular school. We looked at all 4 schools that are landmarks. The high school, Santa Barbara Junior High School, La Cumbre Junior High School, and McKinley. They're all in need of some degree of window replacement.
Okay. Could you please talk about the characteristics of the replacement window and why you think it is an appropriate response to this window? And I don't see that you brought a sample, so we can see what it really looks like.
Correct. This is a preliminary write-up by manufacturer Colby. Came out and did a...
Put it up here, please. Other way. Sorry. We're upside down here.
Oh. Trying to look there at the screen at the same time. I'm not doing a good job.
You get used to it after a while.
Right. So the premise of this particular choice was that Colby, as a manufacturer, does have historic series that they do produce. This window being all awnings was a little unique as far as trying to fit it within their historic series. I think the biggest issue that we have is that the district is under the same Cal Green requirements, and as we look at any larger scale project, we would have to meet Cal Green on window regulations as far as insulating, R values, things like that. And if we were going to pursue a wooden sash, we wouldn't be able to document any of that and submit it to the state like we're required to meet these particular requirements. And part of what I was looking at with that is that because we have so many windows, I'm hoping to work out over the scale customization with the manufacturer to be able to make the dies and other pieces to be able to get very, very close or exact to what we need to reproduce the exterior look of that sash in place. The unfortunate thing is when we're only doing one window, we don't have the economy of scale to be able to get into that kind of manufacturing production if we're looking at that, rolling it out throughout all of the buildings.
Thank you. I'll open public comment. Mr. DeForest?
I just missed the name of the manufacturer of these windows.
Colby? Colby is it?
C-O-L-
K-O-L-B-E?
C-O-L-B-E, because then I can... And is there I'm presuming that this window, the dimensions of this window do not fall into Colby's stock windows. Does this window meet this state standards, and does it and would it look what it look like from the viewer like enough like a wooden window that it could pass muster? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'll close public comment.
Oh, Mr. Chair, there is a letter that I submitted right there. It's an email. Yeah.
Thank you. The letter is from Addison Thompson. He refers to requirements of the Santa Barbara Club to replace deteriorated windows with original wood windows, or to match original wood windows. And he suggests that we should be consistent in our approvals. I'll close public comment to the Commission for questions.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Suding.
So you said this would be a test window, so it's a pop quiz. Who's going to give it the grade? Once it's installed, who gives it the grade?
Once it's installed, I would think that our district facilities team, our architects that we have within the district, and I'd even invite the commission to come and look at this window. We're going to be doing millions of dollars, hopefully, of window replacement with the current bond issues, and we want to make sure we do something that is in keeping with the spirit of the historic nature of that building. So after this test is complete, I would
Well, in order
ask
to
any-
complete the test,
yeah.
you would have us hopefully weigh in.
Yes, oh yes. We'd value your comments greatly, and we always have, and they're always good comments, and sometimes when you have a collectively versus one person doing a design, you get collective input outside of that box. It's a good thing. So we are definitely today here looking for comments or suggestions or anything else, but once we finish a test, we definitely like everybody to come by, and again, we'd love to appear back before you again and let you know what we think our results are and get your comments once again.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Mr. Mahan?
Yeah, you mentioned it's Cal Green. Wouldn't the high school, wouldn't these be under the historic building code?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Our
Does
staff
not.
says yes. So there may be some lenience in terms of glass and all of these particular things with the historic building code.
Correct. They can put in, you're correct. They can replace with materials that match the originals according to the Historic Building Code, and they do not have to meet Title 24 Energy Code requirements.
Provided the Division of State Architect gives us that okay, and sometimes they make
Yeah.
weird decisions.
That can also be appealed to the
And there's
state.
no
If you're
appeal.
suggesting that Sacramento is in
appealed.
another country, I understand.
That's a state code, and so it can be appealed to the state historic building code by the public as well.
That was good.
Commissioner Grabine, questions?
Yeah, are the, when you're saying developing the language because of the economy of scale, so would this test one be using their stock, their stock window versus, well, the first question is, do you mean like changing the profiles of the mullions and the rails and stiles, and is this developed because you're buying so many, this ability to develop them, is that going to happen before or after your test?
Question.
The presumptive prototype would be built with the manufacturer's stock components, and I believe we can match the rail sizes and profiles. We can get very, very close. I think where I would be looking at working with the manufacturer is to be able to work on the face and the connection to the jamb, to be able to, if I could refer you to maybe the third or fourth. This is good.
You did, can we see that?
Yeah. This should have been in
Is
the
it here?
packet.
I'm sorry. Oh, I should have shared these, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's so the last, it'll be the last page is a close enough representation. These are the existing windows that we're looking, so that's.
At that particular building.
Yes, Mr. Chair. This particular graphic shows the relationship of how the sash fits into the jamb. And you can see that the sash fills out the space, and there's very little ornate trim or anything else around that jamb. And it would be my intention to work with the manufacturer to either put an extended lip or some other feature that would make that jamb fill out to the edges of where we would be looking at what they're manufacturing now, where it has a little bit of space around the jamb itself with a little bit of a frame. So I guess the closest reference would be in this particular picture. You can see down at the, I'm sorry, may I borrow this? Down here, where that's the top of the sill, and here where there is a exposed section of the jamb, a little face on it, and then it goes to this oval-shaped piece of stop. This would be kind of representative of what the prototype would already have on it, so it would have this face already existing because that's the stop around the unit. What I would like to try to do is we're trying to maintain that same look, and if we could get this, that's what's reflected in the shop drawing that was on the front page, is this element and that element there. So when you look at it, that exterior frame, I think the largest departure from the original design is that when you see the divisions between the 3 windows in the unit, it's very evident that there's an additional piece of jamb material and framing. And what I would like to do is to be able to work with the manufacturer to create the same overlaps with the new window product, so so it matches what's there.
Understood. Thank you. Commissioner Reyes, questions?
Yes. Are all the windows in all the schools mentioned in the same state?
They are in various states. We need to complete or initiate and complete a inventory and condition report on every window, so we know, because some of them could be repaired. There are others, like the ones that we have here that are on south sides that have just been so weather beaten and with the glass missing and leaks over the years. They're just not restorable.
Have they ever been replaced since the buildings were built?
It does not look like it. It looks like they've been sporadically maintained over the years.
If you are able to achieve a window sample that is similar in what you have now, are you prepared to do all of the schools and get them up to the same standard at this time? Or will you do it in spots?
I believe our intention is to do it in different phases over a period of years.
And if you go with a period of years, are you going to be able to maintain the same company and the same standard, or will things change as companies come and go and materials come and go? In other words, how if something is approved today and 5 years down the road you find that that is not available anymore, then what?
I don't have any concerns about the availability of materials. As you point out, the possibility of any viability of any particular company is unknown.
So what would you do in that case? Would you accept some sort of a condition that you would have to come back here if you were unable to complete the entire project in the proper form?
I would say we would come back here anytime we change anything to get your opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Banya, questions?
Just a question. Are these single hung or double hung, or would you?
They're hopper, they're awning.
They're awning windows. The 2 lower units kick out. The top unit pulls into the
And you
room.
maintain the same?
Actually, we would probably go with a non-operable unit on the top window, just because they're in the current configuration and use. They're not often used, and they're hard to open and close.
Because they're not often used.
Well, that also.
Thank you.
Commissioner House, questions?
Yes. I'm, of course, familiar with the brand, as probably most of you are, but I still can't find on here, are these fiberglass windows? Are they aluminum clad windows? What are they?
They are aluminum clad windows.
They are aluminum clad. Okay. And the proposed glazing, is it simulated divided light or is it a true divided light? Are the muntins separating panes of glass or is
It's simulated.
It's simulated, okay. And, you know, understandably, you would want to show us pictures that represent pretty much the worst case scenario, and clearly there's a lot of failing paint film and caulking, and I do see some evidence of termite or dry rot repair or damage in the sills, but I'm wondering how thoroughly you've analyzed all the windows for that kind of damage, because typically windows of this vintage were built with old growth Douglas fir or something similar to that, and stand up to the elements a lot better than contemporary wood products would. So, you know, I would certainly be interested to know what is the feasibility of restoration of what percentage of the windows and the cost of that versus doing something else before we just say, oh yeah, these look pretty bad, go ahead. And also, I would really like to see carefully measured drawings before signing off on anything. There's some drawings of the windows, but I'm not seeing exactly how that integrates with the existing jamb and the stucco, and so what we're going to end up with and the mullion between units, and just a lot of those details that are so important.
Right. Well, this was supposed to be a conceptual, excuse me.
Yeah, no, I understand, but I'm just expressing up front what my concerns would be going forward.
Right, and your earlier question about evaluation of all of the rest of them, we have not done a comprehensive evaluation of all of that windows across the board. I've maintained that there's going to be probably several different methodologies for dealing with it, and especially I believe on the historic facades.
Building, I'm sure you're going to have different
should
challenges.
Be maintained. The wood windows would probably be maintained there if possible, and if we could move windows from one side to the other and reuse them.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
If a window is savable, if a side of a building is such that the damage is not that great, where we can save those windows, we would try and save that. Whenever we would try to address a full side of a building at a time, so we don't have a mixture on any view.
Yeah. Well, one other question. Is this the only window manufacturer you've had discussions with, or have you talked to a number of them and determined that this is the most capable for coming up with a replica?
I contacted 3 window companies. This was one of the only ones that responded with a sales engineer who was able to come out and do an evaluation. A lot of the rest of the companies were East Coast based, and the Colby had a local representative that I could work with within their design office here in Santa Barbara. So they were the most responsive. That's why I pursued this.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have another question.
Mr. Suding first, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hernandez, one of the public comment was about the University Club and how they did a wood replacement in entirety. Can you remind me a little bit about the University Club and maybe speak a little bit the University Club versus this application? Help us out here.
Yeah, they came in front of the commission, I believe in 2012, and brought in an aluminum clad window.
Right.
And it is hard to get some of the nuances to match in clad that you can do in wood, especially in the profiling. And the commission requested that they redo the replace with wood, and they did a big project, and it looks really. It was very successful. And then when they were complete with that project, it was designated a landmark. It was not yet a landmark.
Have we ever had any consistency issues with requiring something like that for, wood windows for a project and, a historic resource and not requiring? I mean, it seems like Mr. Addison brings up a very good point. For consistency, I get that the scale, economy of scale on a building such as 3, high schools it's huge.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. When the aluminum clad cannot come close to the wood, so maybe this discussion is.
Yes, and sometimes the clad has problems as well. I mean, there's been lots of evidence in the preservation world that water gets behind the aluminum clad and rots the windows underneath.
Died out.
Yeah. So it's important to look at all of the factors. The only times I've ever seen exceptions, and I haven't seen any on landmarks here, would be like on a structure of merit on how, windows on the rear being aluminum clad and windows on the front being original wood.
Okay.
The only thing I wanted to bring up is, some of the schools have different windows than the high school. Like the junior high has turned mullion, those turned beams on the front elevation. I don't know if you're planning the same window for all schools or different windows that match the ones on each school.
Well, let's not go
Yeah,
there
but
since
that
we
was
don't
like-
have that.
Like
that
when-
but no, but and then
Essentially.
that brings up the other question that I had, Ms. Hernandez, is if a facade had enough integrity in the windows that the district would keep those, but on, say, a different facade, opposite facade, maybe the south facade, those didn't have the integrity, and so they would have to be replaced. What is the protocol for having two different materials of windows on a historic structure?
Yeah.
I
think
please
we've
elaborate.
had it, if they match very well, it's considered the flexibility is on the non-public side because it doesn't have the public benefit. And sometimes south-facing windows do really deteriorate under the sun.
Right.
And so at that time, it is protocol to look at some alternative materials, but getting the configuration and
So
the
it's
profile
okay.
to match.
It's acceptable as long as the profiles match very closely. So the different. Okay, thank
and
you.
trying to keep the front elevations authentic.
Well, there's a lot of front
That
elevations
kind of
on this one.
right. It's like it's difficult, but that's been the compromise I've seen in the professional world.
Thank you, Mr. Nettis. I'm done, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Mahan.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, does the school district have is there a foundation that helps to take care of these historic buildings that the school district owns?
No.
The reason
The voters.
that it comes up is because the courthouse, the County of Santa Barbara has the Courthouse Legacy Foundation, and they do raise money to, and by the way, the courthouse has the same kind of window problem that you have. On the south side, on the Figueroa side, the windows look exactly like that picture there. On the north side, the windows are in pretty good shape.
I shouldn't say an exact no. Various schools have various foundations that raise money to enhance the schools, but none of them want to spend their money on windows.
Really?
It's not the most flashiest.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have two. Are these actually used for egress?
No.
Are they used for ventilation?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Chair?
One other question?
One other question of clarification. So I'm trying to understand how the four school, stylistically, are they, one example was brought up of having, one example was brought up that even within the same school, there's different window types in terms of having, spindles or having other things brought in. And aside from not necessarily an economy of scale, but just being a big a big client of the window company, and so they're them giving flexibility because it's such a big project, but they'll customize one thing and they'll customize another thing, or 4 projects, I should say. So the main question I had would be, are the schools actually all that similar in terms of, are even like the light divisions and depths, and or do they have a variation in them, or have you not studied it yet?
We would no way assume that this one classroom would be duplicated for all other classrooms that have a different facade and design.
So
No.
they'll probably be changing by school and also by even within the school, what if there are variations of.
Absolutely.
Right, and there, I might say that there are variations, slight variations in the existing windows from one wing to the other. The main section of the building, which was the original 1922, 25 construction, where this classroom was located was in the 1935 addition. So it's off to the other side, and these are, with the exception of the facade that faces out towards the main driveway, which has the turn spindles on the windows facing that side. This back side, a lot of it is very simple, which is one of the other reasons why I wanted to choose a window on this side to try to reproduce, because looking at finding a good drawing, or even some of a window that we want to take apart to try to take measurements and look at the construction for some of the spindles and other elements, it is just too much time involved to go into that depth at this conceptual stage.
That's all for my questions.
Comment, if you're ready for comments.
Sure.
Being that this is courtesy review, I appreciate you coming to the commission for our feedback. You came in saying that you wanted to do one test window. And I think that it's important for this commission to help evaluate that test window. So my recommendation would be go ahead with the test window, taking into account all of our comments on how close we want it to be to the original window. And also, on top of that, start an inventory of what windows need to be replaced so we can get an idea of the breadth of this scope. That's very important for us in evaluating. So I would say go ahead with the test, because otherwise I don't think we've made our comments. The commission needs to see the test now. Thank you.
Commissioner House?
Yes.
Well, I do have great concern about using aluminum windows. One of the largest is the simulated divided light, and you just don't get the breakup of reflections that you would with putty glazed, nor the depth of the details. And I'm hearing two different things. I'm hearing that there are windows that are in not such bad shape that you might be able to restore, but then there was also discussion about economy of scale of doing a lot of aluminum windows. So you don't have that economy of scale if you restore a bunch of windows. So, and then I also see potential issues where you have turnings on mullions, but you're using aluminum-clad windows and mull covers, and how do you integrate those things together and never get back to something that looks like the original? And the windows are, of course, such an integral and important part of the architecture of these buildings. So, I'll leave it there. I have misgivings about using aluminum-clad windows with simulated divided lights.
If I could.
No comments yet, please, from the applicant.
It's a whole room, not one window.
Yes, understood. Commissioner Vania, comments?
No comment.
Commissioner Arias, comments?
Already been made.
Commissioner Grumbine?
Yes. So there's a couple of major points, and some of them have started to be made. But when I think of it, I kind of zoom out as the big picture and say, okay, 20 years from now, what does it look like? To 5 years from now, what does it look like? The school as a whole. 50 years from now, what does that school like as a whole? And if you go about replacing one way would be we're going to replace all the windows eventually over 10 years. They're all going to be switched out with something that's like this aluminum clad window. And that's one sort of move. In terms of looking at the south facing, which is obviously going to be the most destroyed, and replacing those, then what do you have in 5-10 years? You have one side of a building with one window and the other sides with other windows in terms of the materiality. And so I think that's a big negative in itself. So then if you go back to replacing them all with this and just switching it out, the only real strong argument I would say from an energy standpoint, but again, that would be only if you did everything you could to do the wood window side of things and you couldn't even go appealing things. I think that in 20 years from now, if you did those windows, I think that you'd be back replacing the windows again. Because even though they're lower maintenance or no maintenance until they start failing, then I think that in general most of our modern material methods are not superior. I mean, these are almost 100-year-old windows. I doubt that almost any of the standard off-the-shelf products that we're producing now, dual glazing and separating everything, is going to be looking this good in 100 years.
That's a pretty heady statement.
What's that? I think it's right. So if you can repair as much as you can of this and replace the ones that you absolutely have to, like the ones that are totally destroyed, and put money into maintenance of things and properly, consistently painting them, I think that's a much better and longer term and sustainable, and it's not going to be another set of windows being thrown out in 20 years or 30 years. And so just in terms of when I look at that sort of big picture with so many schools and so many windows, I have to wonder why going this route with and concerns of divided light. The look of it, I'm sure it's not going to look as good. So I would strongly recommend. Obviously, you're not coming before us for or asking for approval. You're it's a courtesy review. But I think it'll be a huge detriment to the building if it goes towards in this direction. I think that the repairing and replacing the worst of them is the best idea by far.
Commissioner Mahan.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the courtesy review. We really appreciate that. And
the courtesy review.
Courtesy review.
Yeah, so far.
And my gut feeling is that you probably will go ahead with the experiment anyway, no matter what we say. And it might be interesting to see that. But I think the Commission's point of view is that this is a slippery slope for us. We have a lot of historic structures, people coming in all of the time that want to change to aluminum clad, and we say, no, you can't do it. You have to restore historic structures, you have to restore them. We have the same problem on the courthouse, and I'm sure some people, the Board of Supervisors would like to change all the windows in the courthouse to aluminum clad, but we're not going to do it. We're going to restore them one by one. And there is something about an old wood window that just is different, and it gives character to the building. I don't care how hard these companies try to duplicate. They will not do it with aluminum clad, and I think we've got to stick with our rule that no aluminum clad in historic structures, and that's our commandment.
Thank you. My own personal comments. The longer I look at these windows, the more I love them. It's been a long time since I've encountered a window as exquisitely detailed as these. I mean, look at them. There's screwed in lead flashing that probably goes under the sill. You've got a piece of molding here that we don't see too often, a lamb's tongue, followed by a curve, a recess, followed by a cove, and then the stop. And if you look at the windows, if I'm reading this right, this is proud of this by like 1/8 of an inch. There ain't, and granted, it's in horrible condition, but for 100 years old, I hope I'm in this good a condition. You know, this one's a little simpler, but again, you've got this really exquisite, simplified detailing of the screwed-in LED flashing on the sill. I don't think I've ever seen that before in a house, or I'd never noticed it. So to say you're going to take this and replace it with a manufactured piece of faux, well, even if it looks like good paint, straight thing, then then I have a problem. So I think in order to get to an approval from us, you have to give us a detail, a measured drawing of what this looks like, of what this looks like, of what this looks like, how much of it's going to remain, how much of it's going to be replaced, and what it's going to be replaced looks like in detail, in large architectural details. How if we buy into the sash being aluminum, how it fits into these existing wood frames, and you know, how much of that you're going to think you're going to have to replicate, or how much you think you can fix before we can begin to sign off on accepting a clad window. And we have in the past, in certain circumstances, accepted clad on new buildings, not on old. We have always asked for wood on old. You know, that, and I don't think you're going to get much further than that. So to summarize the comments that I've heard so far, that we do appreciate the courtesy review and the option to weigh in on this. I've also heard the skepticism of why a traditional clad window would be appropriate. Mullions detail or Muttons in detail are concerns. How they fit into the existing fabric, what they will look like one against another even on the same building around the corner. You know, buildings are not just facades, they're three-dimensional objects. I think, and actually Commissioner House was the one who brought up, we need to have full architectural details of existing conditions and how the new windows would fit in to the old situation.
Along with an inventory.
Well, an I mean, in your own scope of work. I mean, you know, I'm sure you have an inventory of how many of these you intend to do once the test is done. But I think without that information, we can't fulfill our obligation to the Secretary of the Interior's standards of restoration.
Okay.
Well, I did not expect any commissioner to be excited about this project when I walked in here today.
I'm excited about it.
I do not. I think I would. I also agree that wood is old and hard, and there's nothing better. But we'll gladly. I'm going to take your comments back. We have a meeting on Friday with our design team and our superintendent, and we'll fully relay all of your concerns. But I do want to make one statement that the test was proposed for the classroom, not one window on the classroom. So
Okay.
it would be
A bay of windows.
a bay of windows.
Yeah,
This particular bay here?
Yes.
Yes.
That particular bay there.
So all 5 windows.
But there are other windows along this facade that you are
Correct.
not to be addressing.
That's
It's
correct.
just this
Right.
room,
Right. So you'll be
all
able-
windows.
That's
So
correct.
if the district decided to go through with the test, then you'd be able to sit there and do a side-by-side
That's great.
comparison.
And if we don't like it, it will be there for another 100 years.
That's up to our board. That's up to our board to decide, and believe me, we will not go forward and ask for board approval without letting them know about your comments and concerns. We don't do that.
Please do, Mr. House.
Thank you.
I would just like to also make the point that I don't know how you could even proceed with a test of these 5 windows or however many there are without doing full measure drawings to figure out how you're going to replicate that as close as possible. So it's like the first step in doing the test window.
Also, did you get the comment in there about true divided lights?
Yes, I believe it, in Muttons and Mines. And you might consider laminated glass with a film between as a way of meeting the Title 24 as opposed to the air separation.
Especially if they have an option for snap glazing, so it is single glazing and you've got the profile of Muntins.
Yeah. So this is a courtesy review. I think you're hearing from us that no, you don't have our blessing on this.
Loud and clear.
Quite yet.
We do thank you for your comments.
Thank you very much for your time. Are you here for the next one too?
Yes, I am.
Same project?
I will switch partners.
Okay. Our next item is item number 4721 East Coda Street. This is also a courtesy review, comments only.
Everybody should have one of these, but there we go.
Yeah, all right, perfect.
That's even better.
There you go, right up there.
Thank you, thank you. There's a piece of architecture.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Does staff have a lead-in first, or?
No.
No. Gentlemen, introduce yourselves, please.
David Hetjant, Director of Facilities and Operations, Santa Barbara Unified School District.
Steve Key, project architect for LPA Inc.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Commissioners. The district intends to demolish 2 existing buildings on campus that are
Not that one.
that are not historic landmarks, but are adjacent to the main building, which is a historic landmark. The 2 buildings that we'd like to replace are the existing multi-purpose room kitchen building, which is not the most architecturally pleasing site, in my opinion, especially when you look at the truss system on there, and the locker room building for male and female students. Our proposal is to demolish those 2 buildings and replace it with one new building.
Before you go any further, could you show me those buildings before we have telephone calls coming in?
Sure, absolutely. So,
In photograph form. If you can just, well, okay. Yeah.
so I have some photographs up here. So what these photographs are of both the locker room building, which is this kind of slightly taller building, and then the multi-purpose room building, which was added in the 1963, I believe, and was done in a completely different style than what the Spanish colonial architecture currently shows for the main junior high school campus. And so then on, I think it's the next page, one page back, so you can see the main school is here, and these 2 buildings that David was talking about are completely adjacent to, not attached, and are in completely different styles, are the ones that are in discussion to be removed.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry
Perfect.
about the interruption.
That's okay. So we wish to take 2 buildings that are non-landmark structures and replace them with a new building. We asked the architect in their preliminary design to incorporate features of the existing landmark building so we'd have a building which complements the building. And so we are here at this stage of the early design to get your opinion on what the architect was proposing for exterior elevations. And with that, I'll turn it over to Stephen.
Perfect. Thank you. So to add to that, what we're doing, and since we already talked about the existing buildings being in a completely different architecture style, what we're planning on doing is replacing the 2 buildings that are distinctly different from the landmark building, and replacing them with a single structure, which is slightly smaller in scale, but still houses the same uses, in which the use is a full production kitchen, a multi-purpose room, which is a cafeteria with also a middle school basketball court inside, and boys and girls locker rooms. So the uses are staying exactly the same in terms of what is there now, and what we're proposing is to be in keeping with the architectural style, but we're having to use more modern construction methods in order to try to mimic and take cues from the existing architecture there, and kind of pay homage to it. So this is just the floor plan. So in the middle of the floor plan, can you see me? Okay, perfect. So on the left-hand side of the building is the kitchen, which is in a lower element, which we'll see architecturally here on the next slide.
The Ortega Street side.
The Ortega Street side. The multi-purpose room is about the same size as what's currently there. Is their cafeteria / multi-purpose room gymnasium. And then the locker rooms would be on the lower element. So we're really trying to be in keeping with all the same materials. We're still using tile roofs and the elements, still using the white plaster. You can see these pictures up on the screen are blow-up details of the existing landmark building on the campus. And so we would be trying to, obviously we don't have the same type of craftsmen as we did in the 30s when this was built, but we're trying to keep in the same color scheme, the same materiality, and really have a building that is complementing without particularly using the same type of sandstone structures you see here. We wouldn't be able to replicate that type of detail, but we could get close. We could use something that could start to mimic the colors and the textures that are there on the existing campus. You can also see this building is also raised, very similar to the existing Santa Barbara Junior High, and it'll be about the same elevation, so you're still going to get that same kind of base feel to it that you have in the existing landmark structure, and it really could start to bring together what is such a clean lines. We have some arches, we have some of the materials that could bring down into the door windows. I think on my next one, and go back one. The windows themselves, which was obviously our last discussion, we are going to have some awning type windows for that multi-purpose room itself, that it would be naturally ventilated. So they would be operable windows that we would again stay in keeping with trying to get that same feel with more modern technologies and construction methods, but still kind of react and be close to what is there on the existing campus. The detailing, you can see some of the details on the campus gateways. I mean, there's some opportunities that we have that we can bring some of those subtle details that the existing campus has and kind of bring that into this new building that is really going to help set off this internal courtyard that is very popular with the students and heavily used. So this will be a great amenity for the campus. And then on this elevation is actually the elevation that faces the courtyard. So it's the one that actually directly faces the school. It is the south side, so we are also introducing a trellis structure. There are some existing trellis structures on the campus, which have some very simple columns with some gable tile roofs, where we're being a little bit more like what's on the existing building, but keeping in concert with being able to protect those south facade elements, but allow some areas for students to line up and get their food. But all of this really keeping the detailing as clean as we can, but respecting the existing buildings is our goal here. So we haven't detailed this yet. That's why we're here. We're here to show our intent and what we're trying to do and get your comments. And see if you agree we're going down the right path.
Okay. I'll open public comment. Anyone wishing to speak from the public comment? Do you wish to comment?
Yes,
comment,
thank you.
Please.
Thank you. I just from a historic point of view? Does the structure you're going to take down, are there any plans or history of that building? And was it done strictly utilitarian? Or how much did the original design tie into the main building of the junior high school? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'll close public comment. Questions from the commission? Mr. Mahan.
I have no questions.
Mr. Grumbine.
Yeah, on the north elevation.
Yes.
Sorry, I was muted. On the north elevation, that is looking at that and the arch. And what was the sort of the thinking? I know the inspiration was the front arch, but why an arch here?
So we were looking at this is the main kind of view that you would see approaching the school or from Ortega Street. So without it just felt a little light. But we were trying to bring in some of the kind of an entry element. This would be more of a public entry for the multi-purpose room or the public side. You can either enter from the courtyard side or this side. The courtyard side is really more of a student entry. This is more of the public side. So the idea is to try to bring some of that detailing to what will likely become more of a main entry for the public.
Okay, so tying into that, I'm just trying to understand how the flow works. And when we look at the existing site view.
Mm-hmm. The existing?
Yeah.
Okay.
So currently the main way you walk up is from the bottom there with the tower, right? Is that
yes,
am I reading it right
here.
Yeah,
right here.
So that's our current entrance. So the back side is now where the lockers are right now. That's where you're talking about this entrance and arch being. Is
Correct.
that right?
Coming viewing from the approach from this direction is really the only, I guess, kind of entry point for an after hours entry mainly.
Okay, and how does one enter after once this is all done? How one would enter? Where would people come from?
So there's really two parking lots. There's this, it's not a large parking lot, but if it's an after hours event, it would likely be utilized. And there's another parking lot over on this side. So all of those users would likely be coming from the back and then entering on the new site plan. They'd be coming and entering basically up these ramps into this back campus, okay, as well as the front. But this really becomes more of a kind of an element that.
So show me the entrance they would be coming in an elevation. Through the pergola?
So the pergola is this side, and that elevation is to the courtyard, which is mainly for the students. They really could enter on both sides, but we're just looking at it from being the presence on the street or an elevation. That really is the presence that you would see driving up.
Okay.
Understood.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, and then I had another question. So looking at that south elevation, is where you have the gable there, and then you have a band of stone underneath it. What's the difference in plane there that we're looking at? What's the change in plane?
We are anticipating about a 6 to 8 inch difference just to give it some of that depth. We're not sure if it's going to actually be necessarily real sandstone. I don't think we can replicate that necessarily, but we can definitely get in keeping with the detailing and the coloring of what that is. But there is the idea there that there would be a relief.
Okay.
As well as inset windows as much as we can to have the same type of thickness that the existing architecture portrays.
Okay, and then sorry, I'm still going here. One more question. For the covered walkway on the site view.
Yes.
What was the thought on the asymmetry that you have for the covered walkway shifting off of the sort of the main body and gable? Yeah, what was the?
Yeah, actually, there's two reasons for the asymmetry. One is that in the Spanish colonial design, the asymmetry is a big part of the architectural design, but also this is both in response to the architecture to have that asymmetry, but also it's a very functional use. So if you go to the floor plan, you can see the columns of where that actually occurs. So they would still have some southern covered ability to protect from sun, but also during daily use, there's both there's currently serving there on the existing building as well in the new building, the ability to serve students meals from the outside as well as the inside. So it allows some covered protection for queuing as well.
And that's all my questions.
Mr. Sudin, questions? No. Commissioner Rios, questions?
Yes. Have you considered, I understand you want to keep things somewhat stark and simplistic, but in looking at your columns, have you considered another design for the columns on the south elevation?
For the trellis particularly?
Yes, the ones along here.
We had looked at potentially introducing some arches as well. That was one option we looked at. But this really kind of more replicated what was already on the campus. So that's why we're sticking in this direction, but definitely open up to any concerns you may have.
I will have a comment on it when we reach comments, but I would urge you to restudy those columns as they are far too stark for the design of the building, I think.
Okay.
Mr. Vania, questions?
Will your pergola or whatever you have, will it be all weather?
Yes, it'll be solid.
Yeah, and the material will
Yes.
On that same subject, would that be a metal roof on top of that?
On top of that,
Covered walkway?
We're looking at, depending on how much you can actually see, we're looking at it either being a metal roof or a tile roof, depending on if we can get the proper slopes, because right now it's relatively flat.
Exactly. And what is the reason for the plinth that the whole building is setting on?
There's a few reasons. One is just because we need to elevate. We're required to elevate this building out of a floodplain.
Oh,
correct. So that's the main reason, and then also now the elements that it gives the opportunity to give some amenities to the students as well, for places to sit and shade, and as well as the ramps and stairs that are created by having to create the access.
Okay. Commissioner Mahan, questions or comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at the north elevation, which I guess you see across the soccer field or something like that from Ortega Street. I think that you're trying too hard to decorate it with elements of the junior high school of Coda Street elevation, and I don't think that's going to come off successfully. The school, the junior high school, this picture here, if you want to put it up there, you know that it's an incredibly beautiful building.
The overhead, yeah.
An incredibly beautiful building, but if you look at it, all of the elements of it are functional. They're functional as well as beautiful. So when you look at this north elevation and you have all of this, well, it's there if you want to slide it over. The north elevation.
Yeah, can we switch to the?
Yeah, there it is, the north elevation. You know, I mean, this is just all of false architecture that doesn't really have any meaning. And I think it's important that the elements have meaning and have function, and on top of that are beautiful, and then it will be compatible with the junior high school. At the present time, I just think this is trying too hard to do what you don't need to do, and spending a lot of money. You take some of that money and spend it on restoring windows.
Wait, there aren't many houses you can say that to.
The other elevation, the south elevation, I think is better. but also it has this, if you put the south elevation up, yeah, there it is. You know, it has this big limestone wall with some kind of a thing that is typical of an arch, but it isn't. I think that the decoration needs to be functional, and then it will be compatible with the junior high school, which is so wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Grumbine.
Yes. So if you go back to your first slide, so I guess I had one question: is the logo? I don't usually do this, but you gotta. You're off, the logo is off a bay, so you just need to move the tower over one window. So, okay.
Gotcha.
I don't know whose logo it is, but they got to adjust that logo. But actually, I think it ties into the bigger picture with this. I think that, like Commissioner Mann was saying, it looks like you've recognized a number of great elements about the building and then or the current building, and you're trying to use them, composing them into a design. And I think, but I think there's sort of the deeper soul of this fantastic building that you need to understand a little deeper. And I would say, just as a hand drawer, I would say, study a number of the sort of key masses and really kind of get to the heart of what their proportions of opening to void, opening to wall. What are the pitches of things? How much does it open? Why does it open? As soon as you start drawing things, and this isn't a normal comment, but when you start drawing something, you'll start to realize what the purpose for the architect was thinking when he did it. And I think if you really kind of try to get into the soul of the building, it'll inform your designs in a lot of other areas. And I think that moves like having this roof float above, and when you look in the side view, let's see, where is your side elevation? Because I think there it is. Okay, yeah. So this move of having this roof it's almost like it's floating really it is actually floating. It is a postmodern move, and having that it's sort of actually kind of counter to what this building is really about. And so I think in sort of studying this building thoroughly, you'll get a lot of those answers very easily. I think that your overall composition and how you're laying it out, it makes a lot of sense. I think it's going to function just fine and well. I think sorry, I'm trying to look at what you call it, the covered walkway. That's in not a bad place. I think the design of it probably needs to pull out or cover both ways or look at more axes. But the overall organization seems fine. But I think the moves within it, and just you need to really get into the heart of this building to help inform that. So,
Commissioner Suding, questions or comments?
Nothing that's not already been made.
Commissioner Rios?
I think functionally it's going to work, but it just isn't in sympathy with the existing building. And again, there's a starkness and an abruptness to the design that doesn't reflect the existing building. And I look at the south elevation in particular and find it not in sympathy with the existing building. So I think you need to relook and redesign, looking at the existing one and bring those elements in. Also, if there's any landscaping, we would like to see a landscaping plan.
I think most things have been said. The only thing I was relating to were the columns. The columns seem to be rather contemporary, and maybe from that side, maybe you can bring them into more traditional columns to keep it in style with the building itself, as opposed to the ones that are within the courtyard already.
Commissioner House?
I agree with all the comments that have been made. I did have one more question, and that is that presumably there will be a lot of mechanical equipment on those flat roofs. And so as designed, do you know how tall that parapet is?
Yes, actually, the idea is that parapet is tall enough to hide any of the units that are there. The district is not going to be cooling the gym, so that is one large piece of equipment that will not be on the roof, but we will still have all the cooling equipment for the refrigerators and coolers, but that has been taken into account with the parapet heights.
Okay. That's a tough building type, and it's not a building type I'm all that personally familiar with, but my concerns are that the drawings kind of reflect that, okay, you took a picture of some arches on an existing building, and then, oh, let's put an arch on here, and it has no relationship to the arches on the building. The proportions are all different and often not really suitable for the building. You have two pictures of columns, yet you kind of chose to use the more contemporary round ones from a newer structure on the site when you've got some perfectly lovely columns in the picture above that. I especially agree with the comments about the north elevation and that replication of the entry that says entry, but it's a solid infill. So it's just not the appropriate solution to that. Obviously, a lot of the other existing buildings on the campus have functional windows that are part of the architecture. They're, an element that was manipulated to give it a great character, and you don't have that opportunity in a lot of these spaces, such as locker rooms and kitchen spaces. But I am noticing that on the floor plan, most everywhere I see doors and windows, they're in 6-inch walls for the most part. You don't necessarily need to make the entire wall thick, but there needs to be that sense that windows are deeply recessed. And I'm seeing even shadows on the, it was the west elevation that pretty much indicate the way those awning windows are open, that those are pretty much right at the surface of the plaster. So you really need a sense that there's depth. It's a masonry archetype, and those windows are recessed. I'll stop there because, I think that you need to rethink a lot of the design elements, and they need to be proportional and correct and incredible.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr.
I just saw one more thing that I thought would be helpful with this whole thing, which was tying into the window comment and not having a lot in the gym. When you look at this example here, that's exactly the scenario with this wall, one big giant wall, and they can't put windows in there, but they'll do something with that wall and use it to make the same kind of solid void breakup, and then you can go to a big solid, but there's plenty of opportunity there within the language that you have.
Well, young man, you've produced a very lovely piece of postmodern architecture. This town is about Spanish colonial revival. Everything about this elevation says this is the front door. Not a blank arch here that says maybe you should try to walk through the door here. This is the front door. That's why it has a stone surround. It has this gorgeous detailing. The tower says this is the front facade of this building. And so if you were to take that away, take the decoration away, you would come up with the more industrial or less important parts of the building. Here, where there's just a little bit of decoration. And then if you probably look on the other side, that decoration is gone. There are just these lovely proportioned tall openings. So you've got a good floor plan, but you just need to take off all of the decoration or make it real.
Okay.
And you need to break. This is how Spanish colonial revival does an eave, not this. If it does that, it's the base of the building that steps out, not at the top. And if it were to step out, it would step out from this line right here and step out a few inches to be the plinth for the windows. So go back to the high school, junior high school. Go back to the junior high school. Walk around and try to imagine yourself designing this building.
Sure.
Keep it simple. I mean, and I mean, look at this. There's nothing symmetrical about that front. Absolutely nothing. And that's, it's harder to do asymmetrical buildings. It really is. But that's why they're so charming. That's what makes them Spanish colonial revival, is whenever you try to, pattern of windows, all of a sudden it breaks. A pattern of building, all of a sudden it breaks. They were built like they were built over time. Take that approach to your design. And anytime you try to do something modern, like the round columns without any decoration, or the pergola without any decoration, that's for another town, another place, another time.
Mr. Chair.
I heard Mr. House first.
One other point I wanted to make is one thing you don't see on this elevation is stucco expansion screeds. And so that's another thing to consider in the building massing, is to break it up so you could disguise or hopefully not need those, because we try and avoid those like the plague here.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Reyes.
Question. Are you designing this out of the 50-year floodplain, 100-year floodplain, or what floodplain capacity?
100-year.
100-year.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments? To summarize, we seem comfortable with the removal of the non-historic buildings, non-contributing buildings, and in fact would encourage the replacement with a building appropriate in the appropriate Spanish colonial revival style, if somewhat redacted, to the building, including those characteristics of the Spanish colonial revival of simplicity with a degree of complication, finely detailed, appropriately historically detailed, recessed fenestration, and without stucco expansion screeds, which requires either careful detailing or breaking up a wall mass. And they're not liked by most contractors, but eventually they get over it.
Thank you for the courtesy review.
Thank you again for the courtesy review. We hope to see you second try.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We appreciate it.
We want to take a break? Or?
Yeah, I'd love to take a break. 5-minute break. Or let's do 4:50. 7-minute break. The item in front of us is 113 West Delaguerra Street. This is concept review new?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I know this item has come before the commission before, but this is the first formal application. The prior two were one-time application just for concept and comments.
Oh,
So
okay.
this is the first one.
Could you provide me the comments from the previous meeting? You don't have them? I think we liked it.
Yeah, leave it in.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, always bring that back up, especially if you like it. If we didn't like it, then. No idea.
It looks official. I have them.
There's no watermark.
So I'll begin with the prior comments from the commission before we get into this, and then I see staff's ready to talk. Do you want to talk first, or do you want me to talk first? Okay. So the commission comments. The proposal is an excellent example of infill in the city with an excellent design, site response, and neighborhood compatibility response. The commission commended the designers for being careful about the architectural style and scale of the proposal, which are very Santa Barbara and appropriate to the guidelines. The commission supported the use of brick, echoing the brick on the hazard cycle building and the preservation of the hazard cycle building. The response of the building to open spaces, light and air of adjoining buildings was commended. Lowering the roof of the stairwell with a shed roof was suggested to provide more variety and light. It was comments only. Staff, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. I just wanted to bring to your attention that this project does require Planning Commission review. It'd be a concept review only. And that's because it is using the priority housing overlay and it's a lot area of 15,000 square feet or more. So this project would be moving on to the Planning Commission after your review. However, your comments in regards to the design review compatibility analysis or any other design review comments are appreciated by the Planning Commission. Another thing that we'd like your comments on is whether or not story poles, in your opinion, should be required for this project. As you know, there were, as a resolution for story pole guidelines, this project would technically trigger story pole guidelines just by virtue of it needing to go to the Planning Commission. However, there are exemptions that your board could choose to use if you don't feel that they're necessary for this particular project. And I have those for the chair if you want to review those when it comes time.
Okay.
And then lastly, we have an addendum to the Historic Structures Report that was previously approved by your board. Ms. Cole is here to talk about that if you have any questions for her.
Okay. Then, Nicole?
Yeah, I did review the addendum, and I sent you the original Historic Structures Report via email just for your reference in case you wanted the full.
Thank you.
You know, I agree with the conclusions of the report that it preserves the original structure and integrates the new addition appropriately with the setting. I didn't really appreciate the original structure being part of the project.
Okay. As far as our review, should we do the structures report first?
I think if you are feeling at a good comfort with the design, if we change the design a lot, she has to come back with a new report. So
I see.
that's why we usually kind of want to make sure you're feeling that the design is in a place where you can agree with her conclusions.
Okay.
So what
Understood.
changed in the report then?
I think public evaluation. So before you begin, the considerations for exemption for requirement for story poles, which are the proposed structures are clearly consistent in terms of size, bulk, and scale with other buildings in the surrounding neighborhood. The proposed structures are the same height or similar than existing buildings in the neighborhood. The proposed structures will not involve blockage of substantial reduction of an important public scenic view. The proposed structures will not be on a project above a topographic ridgeline. The existing condition of the site dense vegetation, existing buildings, does not allow for adequate story pole installation. It's not applicable, actually. As you make questions and comments, please address those issues, whether you think you need, it would be advisable to have story poles for this project.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to add that your board is also able to ask for alternative visual aids such as photo sims or renderings, perspective drawings, or modeling if you choose to do so.
Thank you very much, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd introduce yourselves for the record.
Alexandra Cole, preparer of the letter addendum.
Ryan Mills with DMHA.
Katie Klein with CJMLA, landscape architect.
Chair Lavoy and other commissioners. Ed Devasani, architect with DMHA.
Welcome. Let's present the project.
Chair Lavoy and fellow commissioners, quick update on where we've been since you last saw us and what we've been up to. We've been through the minutes of the building, and we always carefully listen to what you say and what's recorded in the minutes. This time was easier. The first time, initial concept wasn't as well received, but fortunately we responded well, and the commission agreed with that. So since we've been here, we've had the addendum done to the structures report. We've also gone through another PRT to get, this was our second PRT as recommended by staff, to get all department input, because there were some challenges there in the first PRT with fire department access, building department, et cetera. So we worked hand in hand with all the departments, and through the second PRT process, it was very successful. Only a couple of minor items came up, and those are some design revisions we'll take you through today. But really, the project, as presented previously, is very closely represented here today. The other item that we have is we now have a landscape hardscape design as well. Katie Klein will take you through that as well. So with that, let me hand it to my associate, Ryan Mills.
Thank you. Okay, why don't we dive right in to context. I think we're all familiar with the site. And then, as you recall...
Yeah, a little slower, a little slower.
Sure. So the bottom set of photos is a streetscape facing our building. So we have a historic facade that will be maintaining. This portion is demolished, but then so we use that as the highlight, and we set the rest of the project back behind that and develop. And then you get a peek of our adjacent existing developments on either side. A little broader context of both neighbors, so as it sits. And then we also like to do views up and down the street for additional context. This is looking down to Paseo Nuevo Mall, looking to the west, towards the west, and then additional neighborhood, so a clearer shot of Paseo Chapala and 121, and then also the commercial building down at the De La Vina corner. As you recall, this sheet represents a couple things. So we, as part of the livability of this project, it's really a Paseo and Plaza, I say Piazza in Italian, but the Plaza project. So we kind of wanted to look back and understand scale and widths and space. So that's one reason we showed. These are both inspiration and study. The other was palette. So we were interested in getting an authentic and fairly neutral palette, which Katie will take you through
You need to
in
get
a bit
closer to
more.
the microphone.
So that's what's represented on this sheet. And then we spent a bit of time walking around what we had here in town, places we all know and love. So La Arcada, El Paseo, and just identified, the Paseo systems and looked at the widths versus the heights and kind of identified that just to understand its proportions and then how might that be applied to our project. And then let me start. There's a few site plan changes based on our second PRT, primarily on the ground floor. Well, let me do this. Let me back up one page. really what we consider the heart of the project. Let me do one more backup. We consider this the heart of the project. So this is a podium project, but this really represents the ground floor and the gathering space of the project. So De La Guerra here, and you can see this is the roof of the historic facade that we're maintaining, including the original chimney caps. And then what you see is we're set back about 14 feet with our podium. We have a decorative stair that winds its way up to the podium, and then set back, here about 10 feet for the first unit, and then additional units for the second and third floors. You wander up to the Paseo. We'll provide plantings on both sides, and then you get introduced to the first public or common court is what we're calling it. So this is the first gathering space that you have direct access to the elevator core, the stair, the circulation, and there's a break in the building on both sides at this point. So we have a stepping. This is one of those charming things we liked in like older authentic hillside towns. There's some nod to natural terrain. I mean, we are simulating that, but we just liked the charm and the way it broke up the plaza into two distinct zones. And we're able to do this because this circulation point's not for accessibility. It's just an extra stair. And then the other thing you'll notice is we're really careful to understand the buildings on either side of us. So particularly here, there's a very charming loggia that we're borrowing as architecture. So now our plaza went from, say, 30 by 40 to 30 by 60, and that's our new backdrop. We have privacy here and the ability to plant, but we kind of borrow the airspace, which is really charming. And then we move under this stair and down a Paseo. This is sort of the second zone where it'll feel more pedestrian. We'll change the hardscape, and this is the series of townhomes. So previously we had all the bridging, all that went away. So you kind of now hear your senses, a two-story volume on either side of you that you wind back. And we liked how Meridian Studio feels, and it creates a rhythm as you move down. And then you get to the back, which we call the garden or private court. And this we envision as more for the residents of the project. So same thing, we use the space that was already there around, so we kind of have a visual, much larger plaza than our, say, hardscape footprint is. So it's really, the distinction is two courtyards connected by a Paseo. And then, like I said before, we try to respond and like. So the 121 building are a fairly nice townhomes. So we studied how much setback there, 8 to 10 feet. So we did, as an average, we're, I think, 7 at a pinch point up to 14 here. So we tried to respond in the same way. And again, the looking at it obliquely, we thought created a kind of a nice rhythm for them as well. And then on this side, it's a much more urban and tight environment, but we try to do the same thing. A slightly different shape, but try to observe a similar type of setback and space. You'll see in elevations, and then along the south, we further set back. So we have our ground floors at the property line, but then we step on the second floor here, and then the third floor steps back even more. So that's really the circulation of the site. And then, pardon me. So our minor floor plan changes through the PRT were really mostly inboard. So we ended up reducing a bit of commercial to make a few things happen. So all the bicycle parking moved upward in the project as requested by transportation. So they want this as close to the street as possible and lockable. So we have mostly lockable and a few additional out there for commercial.
You need to get the microphone.
I might do this one.
Yeah, since that one, get it even closer, actually, within about 6 inches.
Okay.
Yeah, the best.
So bike parking was one major nudge. Another significant refinement was our drive aisles were 9 and 9. We were asked to go to 20 feet, so we did that. And again, our pinch point was obviously keeping the existing building. Massage, trash, recycling, utility, and then a little bit of parking layout. But otherwise, these are the things that sort of moved around inside. Didn't affect the front elevation at all. And then I'd like to, these are the same as in the set, we just didn't include the rendered ones. So let me take you through the elevations. Couple.
A202.
So on the front elevation along De La Guerra, you see our neighboring project, and then we step down. This is our historic facade that we're maintaining. You can see our second and third floors are set a ways back. This, I believe, is identical to what you saw previously. 14 feet back is our car entry. This we just had to massage a little bit to widen, but we still maintained our sort of man gate opening or stair. And then, let's see. And then we still propose to grow. We have planters behind this parapet wall, and we're still stepping down. So this is really essentially the same. We previously had brick there, but working with Alex, we wanted a distinction between the brickwork of the historic facade. So we opted not to do that here, but then it picks back up. You can see far off in the distance and in other renderings that will pick up that detail throughout, but just not at the front elevation. And then this tower really is the same as before, as is the south elevation. So our massing has not changed. You see the cottages in the foreground are from the other block, and then our podium is behind that. And then we see 2 steps on our second and third floors, and then we step back farther as we move on up. So this is really as you saw before as well. Our side elevation. So this is the west side. So the 121 project is represented in this darker outline at their property line. And then so what all of these townhomes that exist here are set about 8 to 10 feet back, and then this is what they see. Here's our 3 townhomes that are turned and create nice shadow and light, and we kind of like how the sun will move across them and be different all day long. And then the 2 courtyard breaks, so there's space, a good 60 feet then of breathing room back to our other side of the project, and then a couple other smaller scaled structures kind of, again, come towards but are still set back. So here, so that's the 121 side. And then on the Paseo Chapala side, likewise, let's start here. So De La Guerra here. Here's our historic facade, and then this is our setback. And then as we get to inboard, this is that elevator circulation element at our courtyard, and we played with that a little bit. We were asked to introduce a little bit more whimsy, and that's still in play with trash chute venting and elevators, but we'll be studying that some more, but we did change that a little bit. Introduced stepping. We had a curved wall, I think, before. So now we're stepping with pots, and then we were able to maintain this open for now. So through there, let that breathe a little bit. And then just tried to simplify as we went through here. There's not too many ins and outs, but we wanted to create some shadow lines. It is the northeast side, so not a lot of light will get on here. But just wanted to break down the scale as much as possible down to the south side. You can see how we step. And then finally, just some experiential shots before I hand it over to Katie. Here's the street experience. So again, as we see today, that historic facade, and you kind of get a better sense of the setback, our garage entry, and then this space we've created between, and this we call our little, it's really more of a tower element, which is pushed a little back, and the stair winding up. And then as you go up and go down the Paseo, this is the first experience you get. Here's our first courtyard. This is that neighbor's loggia that you see beyond, and we have the ability to landscape. The other neat thing about the stepping up, it allows for a deeper planter, so we actually get significant trees. We go from from 2.5 feet of soil to up to like 4.5 feet of soil, so it made a big difference to us. And then our decorative stair, and then here's where we start picking up some of the brick detailing, in this half arch, and we're considering it in sills and maybe somewhere else. We don't want to do it too much, and then a little glimpse beyond. And then this is how it feels as you go under that stair and move beyond. So here's our 3 townhomes kind of zigzagging back with a focal point at the end. And then as you go to that rear garden court, turn this corner. So we're back walking towards the 121 project and then looking back at our project. So this is the largest massing and scale of the project. So from the podium, or kind of the livability of it, it's a 3-story village feel, but we kind of wanted to be playful with the forms, introduce balconies, and I know we're still working on some of the detailing, like this one, for example, we won't include. Mr. Mahan suggested that before, so we haven't forgotten. We're just still fine-tuning some of this. And otherwise trying to landscape this as generous as possible. So that's the general walkthrough. Now let Katie introduce you to the landscape, which we're delighted with. What sheet do you want to start on, Katie? Is it just this one? Yep.
L101. It's right after
L1.1.
201.
So I'll walk you just through our ideas for the landscape and the materials, and I'll start in the right-of-way area. So in order to get this driveway, we had to relocate a queen palm, so we're just moving that over in the right-of-way. And then also to meet our stormwater requirements, we also need to have permeable pavers in this entry area. So we have selected a 12 by 12 hydroflow paver, so there is no gap, in a tan color. Our palette generally is a lot of tans and brick as far as hardscape. So moving up through the Paseo, we have a variety of different types of paving that changes from space to space to give you kind of a feeling of a different space as you move through, but still has that continuous tan color, was our idea, similar to the images that Ryan showed you. So throughout the Paseo, we also have planters in various heights from 24 inches to 42 inches, 42 inches being the stormwater planters. And we're trying to get courtyard trees in any planters that we can, so the larger ones. And we really wanted to have a different varying scale of the planters as you move through, so you really get that pedestrian feel and that Paseo feel, and it doesn't feel too high or too low. So it's a nice feeling of change as you move through. And also we peppered in pots wherever we can. And you can see in this image, we're also looking to put vines in anywhere we can to kind of give it that nice look, that historic look of Santa Barbara that we love. And I also forgot to mention, we are putting in a vine here to grow over that entryway, probably. So our palette is very much greens. It's a Waterwise Lush type palette, so a lot of different greens with pops of red is what we're thinking. So probably a red trumpet vine, wherever we can. So moving through the Paseo, as far as the paving, we have a cobble in a change of different sizes. Let's see, 5 by 8 and 5 by 5 in tan in a blend color, and then also a 12 by 12 to match the hydroflow size, but it will be more of a pedestal paver, but the same type of color to match. So that is this here, and this is the cobble. So it goes every other one with a brick band. So we wanted to also introduce some brick as well. So we used brick to separate through the Paseo. And then also for this nice stair detail, we love the Rolock brick. So it kind of adds to that brick, and this is only the main brick area. And then this would be a stacked bond on top of here. And so the other idea with this courtyard, this more public courtyard, is to really have activity in it. It's more of the social courtyard. So these steps act as an informal seating area as well. And then we wanted to have some sort of focal point in the paving that was flush. And so we're still working through that, but we're thinking maybe a Monrovian star in either a tile or a stone or a different type of paver to be the focal point in this Paseo. And then also, I have a picture here, the top planter to have a bench built into the planter. So this is really an area with a lot of different seating and can have movement. And then moving through, I'll just also touch on the different types of trees through these planters quickly. We have Schefflera, Citrus, Brugmansia, so those are the smaller type courtyard trees. And then also we've peppered in Howia and king palms wherever we can. So moving through the courtyard, I talked about that. We get to the garden courtyard. So this area we also wanted to have a nice center focal point as well. So we're thinking of having a fountain planter. So it's not really a fountain, but it would look something like this image here. So it would be more of a planter, but have a focal point of a fountain top. And then it would have a flush runnel, like this image here, and this image here, similar but flush, of tile that would run to the planter and have some sort of focal point on the planter. So this is more of a quiet, lush area, so we really want to fill that in with philodendrons and make it more of a quiet space and more of garden space. And we also have possibly an espalier in this area, so it's just a lot of lushness is what we're trying to get in this corner. And that sums it up, basically, for our design.
Katie, could you touch on two things on the landscaping? One is on the perimeter to the neighbors, and the other is, I think staff and I were talking about this earlier. There's a street tree that's proposed to relocate it, and my understanding is the Landmarks Commission is the reviewing body for that in El Pueblo Viejo. So if you could take us through the street trees as
Sure.
well, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
So we have an existing king palm here, and I mentioned in the beginning this queen palm will be moved. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. So you guys have to review that, but we're just moving it in kind, and we're adding another king palm here as well to help that elevation from the street and a vine. And then just around the perimeter, we've added in we have some stormwater planters, like I mentioned, 42 inches in each of the patios, and we're trying to get trees in those wherever we can to really help with the elevation. So we have those all peppered throughout the back. So each, unit has a planter and some sort of greenery in the back.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Katie. So the design response, we've worked very closely with the civil engineer, and there's a full hydrology package that's been prepared and submitted and was reviewed as part of the PRT process. So we're confident that this design meets the intent of SWIMP and will hold, and that's we've proven that for ourselves. A couple other things to close, Chair and fellow commissioners. We covered the street tree, the story poles. So our review of is we meet the criteria for exceptions for this, but I did want to offer and make you aware. The way we've constructed this design and model, we had the entire site and the neighbors fully 3D LiDAR scanned. So we actually have a virtual point cloud of the entire thing. And our project is modeled in a 3D, and all the plans you see are from our single 3D model. So we know that we're very accurate with both our project in relationship to our site, but also the neighbors. So all of the rendering views that you've seen are true to what we intend to design in the relationship to the neighbors. So for your consideration, we've added what's important, we believe, to present the project and how the look and feel is. I would offer, if you are interested, in lieu of story polls, from additional visual simulations from areas that you believe are important to address any particular either public viewpoints or any of the neighbor ones, we'd be open to that as well, and we can prepare that for Planning Commission to understand, and also when we come back to you for PDA. So today we are here for comments towards the Planning Commission and some of the specific criteria for design guidelines and the story polls, but also anything that you want to see. We're not allowed to change the design. When we go to Planning Commission, we'll present them the same information, but when we come back to PDA to this board, we'd like to know some additional comments from you on how we can fine-tune the design to be more acceptable for the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex, any comments on the historic structures report? No. Other than what you presented? Thank you. I'll open public comment. I have a few. I'm going to mispronounce it. Ms. Visali, if you'd come forward to this speaker, please. Microphone. Followed by Anna Sullivan.
Yes, I see that this is a very worthy project in the design itself, and I can understand why it's pleasing to this committee. But I see this project as a noble concept. That is, it's going to provide low-cost housing. But I think the result will be an ignoble one, because it's going to deprive many of the tenants on either side of this project of both light and privacy. There may be, I think, if you look at this, it's really antithetical, get that word right, antithetical to the Santa Barbara architectural style. If you walk around downtown, you see a number of large scale buildings, 3 and 4 stories and massive. But on either side of them, you see low buildings, and you see plazas, and you see open parking and street area parking. So you don't see a big tall building sandwiched between two others as they are here. And I think that this is really the main fault with this whole idea, is that you're trying to squeeze something into this block that doesn't belong there. Even El Paseo Nuevo has open areas. If you look at the two large buildings, Macy's and Nordstrom's on either end of it, those are surrounded by and anchored by low buildings and open areas. The only open area on this block at this time is what you see now at these low buildings and that exist there. And the last consideration, which I think is particularly important, these are not, the two big buildings on De La Guerra are not, they're not stores and they're not office buildings. They're residences. People live in these. And what's going to happen here is that the people living here are going to be subjected to a great deal of massive noise and dust and whatever happens in a construction project of this scale. They'll be here for over maybe 6 months to a year putting up with that. And the end result is that the people who, about a third of the tenants who live on either side of this project, are going to lose a lot of their light and privacy. There are terraces here. This is not a building with just windows. These are terraces, and people are going to lose their light and privacy. The scale of this just isn't appropriate for anything in Santa Barbara. So that's my comment for this time.
Thank you. Anna Sullivan, please. Thank you. Please begin.
I'm Anna Sullivan, and I am a resident at 105 West De La Guerra. And these are my comments. The third floor lot line balcony of unit number 18 of the proposed building actually touches the lot line balcony of unit N of 105 West De La Guerra. These would have two opposing master bedrooms facing each other, causing not only a privacy concern, but causing a security concern. Number 2, unit number 4 and unit number 6 of the proposed building has a 0 lot line. With the entire building of 105 West De La Guerra having a 0 lot line, it gives a feeling of encroachment. Number 3, special attention has been given to the flow of the neighbor to the west, but none has been given to the neighbors of the east. The west side has interesting setbacks, architectural features, landscaping, and goes only to 3 floors. Absolutely no attention was given to the view from the east side. The walls are plain, obtrusive, and towers above with 4 floors. Number 4, with existing neighbors already up 3 floors with 0 lot lines, building an even taller complex up 4 floors is too big. The 4th floor should be confined to only the south end of the complex to mirror the existing neighbors. Number 5, although we have a great walk score of 98, we have not given up our cars. The proposed spaces are not enough. This will mean more cars scrambling for street spaces. Presently, several units to the east rent spaces in this proposed site. All these cars will be on the streets. All the neighboring streets have 75-minute parking. This project will affect neighborhoods several blocks away that are already dealing with parking congestion. In summary, there should be no 0 lot line structures above the ground floor. The height and scope of the project should be reduced, and some architectural features should be added to the east side. And I've included some pictures for your viewing as well.
You done? Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public wishing to speak? You need to fill out a form, but come forward first.
But you can come.
Come on up first and then fill it out, please.
This project needs to be addressed from the perspective of the 121 building as well, because although it is indeed only 3 stories on that side, and I can see that the architects have made some, pretty interesting plans in terms of aligning the 2 balconies and offsetting the buildings in terms of 3 of the units. Unfortunately, those balconies then back up immediately. I mean, we're talking this close to the existing units. If you live there, how would you feel about that? Secondly, if you look at their unit 13, which they just call the tower and kind of ignore, you see where on all their other units, the back units that are angled, they're showing the courtyards from 121, and they're using that as their airspace. But on unit 13, which is right at the front, and the tower, that's right on the 0 lot line, right there, exactly, and that blocks the light, the air, and everything, literally, and the balconies from units 2 and 14 in 121. Clearly, that's not an adequate way to address your neighbors, basically. So I'll fill out a form for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I'll close public comment to the commission for questions. Mr. Mahan?
Did you say Mr. Mahan?
I sure did.
I have a question about this chimney on the hazard. Is that going to go away? This thing here on page 8, photograph 8.
Yeah, Mr. Mahan, the original double chimney cap detail is the original portion.
Yeah.
We are maintaining that. The bulb out, the bulge is a newly added feature, I think, just a handful of years ago. That's being removed.
Thank you. Thank you.
This was just added.
Oh.
It's a utility closet, and they disguised it as a chimney.
So that goes away.
Yeah. Yes.
You really wanted to, don't you?
The other question I have is I don't understand, and I don't think you've pictured, or I can't find the pictures of what's happening at the back of the building in terms of the neighborhood. The neighboring buildings at the back. Has that been? I don't know what's there.
You have a photograph of this area?
Yeah. What is there? What is that?
Actually, there is
from
a
there
photograph
to.
of that
Just see, the
area.
next street down from De La Guerra is Ortega, right?
That's right here.
I think in the aerial.
Is that it?
No, that's the
No,
one
that's
they
our
tear
property.
into
Let me
corner.
see if we have that in aerial. Let's start with our.
Oops, sorry.
I'm not sure if we do. I think we do. Maybe survey.
There's an aerial.
But these are this is La Arcata and El Paseo.
Oh, that's La Arcata, okay.
I know on our survey we will, at a minimum. Pardon me, Ken.
Here you go. It's not numbered, it's the civil sheet before sheet C 1.0. Well, here you have it. Awesome.
Yeah, so I think there might be a bit more context here. We'll look at both.
Yeah.
So along Ortega, there's a cluster of buildings. So, and towards the back, they're like bungalow cottages. It's not a court, but it's a handful of buildings. So you can see here, I believe they're about 10 feet. We haven't measured that. We can check the survey, but 10 feet set back from our property line. So we are a podium project, so we are at a 0 lot line just on that first floor And then as you see, then we're setting back with our own patios and stepping back on the way. But so those are the structures. We can bring in more photography of these structures. You can't see them from the street, so if we get permission to come back here.
I think, well, that'd be a comment. So you really haven't shown us too much of that area yet.
True.
Thank you.
Commissioner Grumbine?
Yeah. Okay.
Questions.
So, and part of it, okay, so part of it ties to what was just being asked. I can flip to it here. Okay, so looking at the report, so looking at, so this band in particular of,
What page are you on, please?
oh, sorry, page 7. So on page 7, this is an older photograph from 2004, and it shows it before it had the chimney. You could turn that out, but it also in that photograph it shows that there's the brick ends on the corner, and then I was noticing that in here the brick continues around, and then I noticed in the elevation you show that brick continue even more and end in your building, and I'm just curious as to the story of the brick, whether was there, got covered up, is there, and just fun to uncover. What's the story of that? Story of the brick.
Thank you for pointing that out, Commissioner Grumbine. Do you know, I don't know, as a matter of fact. It's an unknown to me. That, as you saw, was the first picture on page 7, which was in my early report. And then they came back later and did that extra piece added on. And so I don't know at what point that was uncovered and whether I don't have original photos of the 1928 to know whether that did indeed wrap around.
Okay. And speaking of original 1920s, do you have anything of what the original fenestration was for those openings here? I'm assuming that this is not the original. This has been replaced.
Right. It's been replaced a number of times. I don't have. I've got the one that isn't in here from 2004.
Okay.
But it doesn't do.
But you don't have anything from the original.
From that drawing. No.
Okay. 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 Well, another question about the. So in the report you have. This is probably the best photograph for it. In the report, you talk about the front being the most important and really the only thing that is, officially worth saving. Can you comment on? This is in my sort of what I've seen around and not just around Santa Barbara, but around in this time. It's a little bit non-typical to have a gable go up and then come back down the other side on buildings like this where they were assuming that the next building's going to get built over and stacked next to it, so you won't ever actually see that detail. And usually it just goes to flat and goes all the way back. And it's just this sort of Taco Bell front that in a 1920s Taco Bell sort of way.
Thank you.
So
it's Bedonia.
I'll remember that description for a next report.
Right.
Thank
Good.
you.
So do you have any comment on or weighing in on getting rid of this, because that's part of the proposal, right? Is to bring the line to here. So can you comment on that a little bit?
I had not necessarily gone into that particular back piece because I felt from this kind of double chimney was very much part of the architect's oeuvre, and I could go and look at some of the other buildings, but I was just counting up to that point, but wanting to make sure that that double chimney was placed there.
Okay, that's good. Let's see if I have any other questions. Okay, and so in looking at, and this might, well, it goes to, it is just clarifying, and not just the report, but on the report you show here, right there. So you're showing that this center part of the arch being removed for egress, which is what is shown on the plan. I noticed in one of these renderings it is shown with a door there. And I just wanted to try to first of all, just to understand what's actually being proposed. And then, so here it looks like the glass is there, or glass is half full. But there's another rendering.
The first floor plan.
Okay.
First floor plan? Ground floor or third?
Ground floor.
Ground floor.
First.
So it shows us a storefront.
Yeah,
Resting
so
storefront.
we're trying to maintain this. We're trying to maintain the historic storefront and match detailing, but we will go to a single egress door, which, we're not out of the woods yet. It's something we're gonna have to work on, because it wants to swing outward. But this vestibule, we wanted to, it's really part of both the commercial, but the end of the exit passageway. But we want to maintain the character and detailing of the existing storefronts, but do go to a single door as opposed to the commercial one. We had a desire to maintain the French doors.
Okay, but this would be a single door, but not just a gap, not just an opening.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Well, so it must be an exit door. So we haven't resolved all the detailing.
Okay.
The desire is, so we're going to have to work on that one a bit. So we don't have a solid answer for that, but we're going to have to see what we can get away with to match existing. But as it goes out, the option would be removing this and setting something back, or nothing at all. But we know that's not acceptable, so we need to maintain it. So whether
Thank you.
Yeah. We don't know.
Okay.
We have to work through what we're allowed to do at that door.
Okay.
Difficult.
Mm-hmm. It will.
Okay, so that's all my questions.
Commissioner Sitting, questions?
Yeah, we actually ended up on a good page here. Ms. Klein, you mentioned that there are permeable pavers, gapless permeable pavers here right behind the sidewalk. How far into the garage travelway do they go? I'm obviously, they're not going to do any good once they're underneath, but just sort of getting an idea of what that aesthetic is going to look like. Are you stopping the pavers there, and then this becomes concrete? Okay. Are you planning on doing like a colored concrete of some sort, or something to?
Have we identified that yet? Yeah. That portion.
Okay. Okay. I'll then go into comments, and then on I think it's the elevation rendering, or no, you know what? It was one of these contextual. That shows the best here. I know that you had to manipulate this to get it wider. Is there any room over here on this side to actually get that post or that deck above to hit the ground instead of attaching itself to the historic building? Is there any room for play over here? Or are you locked in?
Right.
Wait, let's stop right there and let me ask the next question, because it shows here very well. Is this cheek wall necessary up against this facade? Or can that cheek wall go away?
Commissioner Sitting, there, because that exit stair is so close to the property line, we have to provide protection up to 10 feet above that stair line from the adjacent neighbors. It's a building code requirement.
Right, but this cheek wall of the stairway.
In that detail, it could be provided a different way. As a stepping, is that what you're referring to?
Right.
Yes, it could be provided.
You
in
could
a
just
different
attach your
form.
railing to this wall of the elevation of your exit way.
Well, that's the neighbor's wall. You're
Oh, it is.
Yeah,
Okay.
That's what we're
All right, and then the last question is on your zero lot line. I'm assuming there are no windows there at your Okay.
We can take you through that.
I saw it in the photo, but I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding it, that where you're going to zero lot line, there are no windows that you would be impeding.
That is correct.
I figured as much. I just wanted to ask the question because it was brought up by a member of the public. So thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Rios, questions?
Question on AS 102. How is handicap access gained? I see stairs, but I don't see how you're going to gain to those open areas. A102, AS 102.
So,
AS 102.
Yes.
That's what I said.
Yeah, you did.
we could show on the levels too. Starting here, so this being the podium level, so most traffic comes into the parking structure, and then we have the main circulation points here. So both elevator, which is addressed first, so it's connected to this first courtyard, and then the stair is behind it.
So access is through the handicapped access is through the elevator.
Correct.
And what if there is no electricity?
Have to stay in the garage.
I believe
It isn't a
projects-
matter of staying in the garage, it's a matter of also being able to vacate this area. I think that is something you need to do some thinking about. And I apologize, I have to leave, but that is one of my concerns.
Sure, we can address that.
Are you done?
Yes, I'm leaving.
I have no comments.
Questions?
Questions?
Commissioner House.
Mr. Chair-
Comments?
Mr. Chair, I
Mis-
have one other question.
Mr. Mahan.
Yeah, on the report, this is a Edwards and Plunkett building. Were the original drawings available for the hazard cycle arches?
I was not able to locate them.
You weren't? At the city
Yeah.
city archives? That's interesting. Thank you.
To the commission for comments. Mr. Mahan?
Well, I commented positively before on this project. It really hasn't changed that much, and I still think that it's a very good example of AUD. I understand the neighbors would prefer not to have anything built here. I mean, I can understand that, but I don't think that it's the commission's prerogative to say that this landowner can't develop similar to the adjacent properties. The only, and it's a nitpick, but the only thing that I see right now that bothers me is this window on the De La Guerra, the arched window on the De La Guerra where the building is up. Yeah, it seems like it's pushing against that roof too much. I know that that's a funny shaped building and it has a funny shaped roof. Otherwise, it would seem to me like a gable would be better there than a hip, because or you could lower that window. Maybe it shouldn't be an arched window. It just needs to have more mass above that window. And then this is, of course, a very important elevation. But generally speaking, I think this is an exemplary AUD project. And I think the size, bulk, and scale is appropriate to the neighboring building. And I would like to see that one little molding off on the back. And also I'm really concerned about the neighbors to the south and what they will see and what will look down on them. And I don't think that that's been studied and exposed enough to the commission. Thank you.
You too are from the south?
The south of this particular project.
Oh, I understand.
Toward Ortega Street.
Yes, okay. Yeah. Mr. Gumbel.
Okay, so let's go to actually elevation's fine. Actually, maybe better perspective. What's your perspective sheet?
Last couple.
Okay.
Back here. Where do you want to be?
There we go. Okay, perfect. Okay, so so first, just in terms of concerns with the historic building and how that works with your proposed, one of the things I noticed was this building being built right against this chimney. Although I'm sure it's not a fireplace right now, it just feels like that's it needs to at least pretend to be a fireplace that wasn't that has some space around it. I don't think I agree with Mrs. Cole that the back part isn't the most important. So I think that portion can be let go, and you can kind of keep towards this. But I still think the chimney itself, when you build right to it, looks very funny. You know, trying to catch yourself on fire. The other thing that I noticed in your elevation that was in here was and now it shows here, is the windows. And they're shown in different places with this one, this being here and this being here.
Oh. These aren't there. Right. That was working with Alex, we did revise these, so now they're just tucked under.
Okay, so
this one's gone.
Correct.
And it's
It
flipped over to there. Okay. So I do like it better away under, but then at the same time you're putting a window under a solid thing, and so then you have the weirdness of that kind of.
But that was not wanting to add anything on to that particular historic section, and so we discussed that.
Okay, so I like the move away from that, but then again I would wonder, well, do we even need windows underneath there at all? And yes, I know that's terrible and taking away light, but someone could have built back in the day right onto it, and these buildings were, the shoe boxes of blank walls, stacked to. So, if I would say that would be not necessarily better for the people inside, but architecture is not about people. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Take it from the record.
Tell where you went to school.
I'll remember that also for my report, along with the Taco Bell. Thank you.
That's right. Taco Bell and architecture not being for people. Okay, so that's kind of the comments regarding the historic structure and this. I think you've done a wonderful job catching the character paseo. I wish, of course, that you could sync the parking and this could be on level so you can actually have open to the street level, but I understand that's kind of already too late and also too expensive. However, I'm still very concerned with the massiveness of it compared to everything else, and the fact that every section is very hard to understand exactly what's happening. So the LiDAR thing, I think if you can do a 3D model that really starts to show that, I think that could take the place in my mind of story poles. Only could, because story poles, you're going to have a million little story poles sticking up, and you actually aren't going to understand exactly how everything relates. Whereas if you really have a good 3D model of it, you can actually really understand how it relates more. And I think this is a very complex double neighbor site. So I would say that would be, for sure, my first impulse would be that would tell us a lot more than story poles, especially in this site where everything's inboard in between two big structures. So all in all, the other things, I think that you're well on your way. And actually, one last thing is that involving this door again, I think that it is the whole egress thing, and whether if this went to nothing, I think I would see that as a problem. That's kind of sort of like a toothless, this is just an opening without any glazing. So I would see that as a very, very important thing to try to keep the look of at least all glazing. So if there's any possible way.
I just wanted to follow up on that really quickly. It does outline in the structures report that's the character defining feature on the front of remaining. So we have to resolve that door because we need to have something. They're just the most character defining things, doors and windows.
Thank you. Commissioner Suding, comments?
Yeah, I think that the landscape plan looks fine. It's apparent that there was some thought put behind it, and you've done a good job on that. My comments are really just nitpicky, and they're sort of following off my questions. I think that the paving, now that I'm really looking at this rendered image, that paving, even though it's not going to function as permeable paving, I think that needs to go back into that throat quite a distance to end it. Even if you did a stained or colored concrete that's the same color, it's just not going to read it. It's going to be so harsh. It would be so much nicer to bring that back into the throat. And then bringing this end of the deck wall, I don't know how you're going to do it, but down to the ground, I think that's important. I think Mr. Grumbine was sort of touching on that too. That deck railing can't just end at that building. It needs some sort of termination. And then lastly, the cheek wall on the stairway to the west is at the streetscape is sort of awkward. That how that interfaces with the adjacent building needs some study and some resolution. So the cheek wall on the stairway, the west.
Cheeky?
Huh?
Is cheeky?
Cheeky. Too cheeky.
Commissioner Vania, comments?
Just a couple of comments. I agree with what's been said. Within the confines of the inner courts and so forth, planters that you have, I can see some more vertical trees as opposed to some palm trees, just to soften the buildings and give it some shadow patterns.
Oh, I guess he doesn't have a voice. Yeah, can he use this one?
There you go. We'll break shortly for
I'll leave it
commercial break.
So as I was saying, I think some vertical trees, the landscape architect can select some of these, but some with branches and so forth to create some movement and have some shadow patterns to ease the effect from the neighbor's viewpoint of what they're going to be looking at. And in addition to that, I too concur that I'd like to see a model of it to see the impact of the whole thing and be able to rotate it and see the three-dimensional effect as to what we're going to be looking at. Thank you.
Commissioner House?
Well, the architecture is undeniably beautiful, but I have to be the lone dissenter. On the brief time that I've been back on the HLC, I'm seeing that each AUD project that comes in wants to max out what they can build on the site. And I think it is our job to really look at what that's doing to the neighborhood and livability of surrounding buildings. And I really feel strongly that at a minimum, Unit 23 and perhaps Units 1 and 14 need to go away for different reasons. Unit 23 on the, the south end, is 4 stories high pretty much at the property line with a 1-story building adjacent to it, and we have no idea what, how long that's going to stay there or what is going to get developed, but I think that's just inappropriate to have that 4-story next to the 1-story property. As well, it's 2 stories up from the community courtyard, and I think that's going to be just a shadowy hole in there, and I think it's much better to take a story off the 4th floor there and get more of the south light, basically, into that courtyard and the whole corridor system. In the front, the De La Guerra elevation, I think that Unit 1 and 14 being immediately behind the chimneys just renders the historic building as kind of an afterthought stuck on to this 3-story building. As Commissioner Grumbine mentioned, it's not credible in regard to the chimneys there, But in addition, Unit 1 seems to have windows that presumably have a 7 foot or so head height, and they're maybe 2 feet tall because they've got to respect that roof slope. So it just really does not look like the way you would go about designing it if you were starting from scratch. And I think that it is looming over the historic structure, and it really needs to get set back at the street so that things build up much more gradually. I would still not want to see a 2-story wall just set back further. I would like to see it just gracefully step back from the street more. I think that's the main point I want to make. There's other detail points that I think were well made already, but I think that now is the opportunity to say, no, this is too much. And I hope the Planning Commission listens to the comments that the people that came today made and consider dialing it back a little bit. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Vania?
I have one more comment. As we proceed with all of these AUDs and so forth, what is really happening is the deconstruction of neighborhoods. And that, I think, is what we really have to be careful of, the deconstruction.
Thank you. My own personal comments. When 105 De La Guerra came in, and it was not an AUD project, it was a standard project of what we used to see back then. I asked the architect, Mr. Pikert, okay, what happens when the neighbor, who's entitled to do that, builds a 3-story blank wall against your unit? What happens to these $2 million condos you're selling? I sure wouldn't want to live in one. How are you going to accommodate it? And he didn't. He built the maximum amount of square footage that he possibly could for his developer, in service of the developer. And the developer sold these projects knowing quite well that the neighboring property could build a building just as big as he did right on the property line. That is the joys of living downtown. So when now an infill project, and the project next door was built with a little more sensitivity to the neighborhood and the potential of someone infilling a project. And this project came in with us, and we said, what are you going to do about the neighbors? And they did. They changed the form of the building. They paid attention to where your open spaces were and pulled their building away from your open spaces. And where your building touches the property line, their building touches the property line. So I think this is an excellent example of how you infill in a property. I've also seen huger projects. I don't consider this out of scale with the 2 adjacent properties at all. At all. And I continue to think it's an excellent project, and only some finessing. And speaking to the comments that were just made about the relationship of the old to the new, it would seem better to me if the old building was stuck on to the new building, and so that this line came down, even if it's a 2-inch gap, so that it obviously looks like they're different buildings as opposed to the same building coming through. So there's that. This is old. This is new. To the Secretary of the Interior standards. It would be better if this chimney didn't vent into a wall. However you do that, you either pull this back or pull it, niche it, or do something with it. That does feel odd. I kind of like this and make it even higher so that it hid that roof entirely. I kind of like. I don't think this is really going to be an issue. Actually,
it looked different in the elevation.
Yeah, this is more looking up, and you are going to see more plaster above it. So maybe, study it in section there. I don't think that units, I disagree, I don't think units need to be removed. I do want to see the brick come back, actually come back to that break. Either dig it out or hopefully it's still there. We'll very much do that. This is old, this is new. Hold this up and it only has to be like a couple inches of reveal to make that work. Otherwise, I pretty much agree with most of the comments. But before I summarize, I do need to take a straw vote on how many commissioners consider the project in size, bulk, and scale appropriate to the neighborhood. Hands, please.
What about if you're wanting to see a 3D model before you want to hold judgment? Is there an option for that? Because I don't.
Is that what you're requesting?
Yeah, I would say that a 3D computer-generated 3D model that then allows us to look at this in size, bulk, and scale. And actually the block.
And also the Commissioner House's comment about the 3-story building at the back. I think we need to understand a lot better what's happening with that neighboring property that goes to Ortega before we make a decision on that. But I'm sympathetic to maybe lowering that down at that particular corner.
Okay. In the 3D model, do you want to see this building, of course, the two adjacent buildings as a massing model?
Yes.
And the building that's on the south?
Yes.
The buildings on the south?
Basically all properties touching.
Yeah.
All properties adjacent, immediately adjacent.
Yes.
That seems to be consistent with the requests we can make. I think that would be more revelatory than story polls, to be honest.
And I think we should send that comment to the Planning Commission.
Or do we want to see it before you go to the Planning Commission? Because you're going to get, I'm hearing that the Commission doesn't want to make the findings that would send you to the Planning Commission with a positive comment before we get that 3D model.
Oh, okay.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
That's my opinion.
That's what I'm hearing. So,
Whoops, Mr. Chair.
whoops, they've already put it on the calendar and it's, and it's tomorrow.
It is agendized for Planning Commission already
The
for
16th?
November 16th. You are able to ask for an alternative design. Definitely you would have that before PDA. I guess my thought is usually story polls, the reason why we want the timing of those prior to Planning Commission is because we won't put them up once before their comments and you guys see the same ones. The modeling is something, the only example has been done, I think, at PDA for the 800 Santa Barbara. And also we could inform the Planning Commission of that hearing. They could come and comment then. But yeah, not...
So but it would go to Planning Commission without comment as to neighborhood compatibility.
And that is allowed. So the compatibility criteria is not required because the Planning Commission is not making an action on this project. It's concept only for comments, and your board makes the decision on the project. So they're providing input on the general plan consistency. That's different than a project with a development plan or a permit that requires their approval. So those compatibility criteria are not required.
But I think I know what to do, okay? In summary of our comments to be forwarded to the Planning Commission, the Commission is requesting a 3D model to better understand the impacts to the adjoining structures and the context of the neighborhood, the immediate neighborhood. However, we do find the design to be exemplary in its current form with minor alterations. And we are on record as saying that the size, bulk, and scale is appropriate, but requiring further study by the commission. So a motion for an indefinite continuance with those comments, please.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I think I will vote no. Just because I would like the Planning Commission to know that one commissioner did not feel the size, bulk, and scale was appropriate.
Okay. So House, no. For the reasons stated, please.
I think you should maybe postpone the historic structures report until you have, after the study with the LiDAR and the 3D modeling, to make sure you'll still agree with the conclusion of the report. She's going to change her design, the design changes.
That's to me.
Okay, so an indefinite continuance also of the historic structures report?
I'd like to join Mr. House's.
The no vote?
The no vote.
Okay.
As I did before.
Commissioner Bania changed his vote on the previous motion?
In the second, or add an asterisk? Pending final. No, I'm okay with it because we have the other language in there. I have a back door still.
You do. So I asked for a motion for postponement of the historic structures report.
So moved.
Second, please.
Second.
Any further discussion on that?
What was that motion again?
The motion for postponement of the historic structures report.
Oh, yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. I believe we are adjourned.
All right.